Goes red. And we're live. Okay, I'm here tonight with Arya. I hope I said it correctly. Is that right, Arya?
Arya.
Arya, sorry,
Yeah, no, you're
Arya.
good.
Apologies. Yeah, I'm here with Arya. We're gonna have a bit of a chat about left-wing politics, about identity politics, nationalism. A few topics I think that are quite relevant in political circles. Certainly ones that draw a lot of ire for a lot of people. We'll see. It'll be interesting, actually, to talk with someone that is from a left-wing position. Usually I spend my time speaking to a lot of quite right-wing people. So it'll be interesting to be closer to my own sort of position. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I finished work like 30 minutes ago, so my day's pretty much just begun, basically.
Oh, ideal. Excellent. Well, I suppose I'll hand the floor to you to begin with. Where we had a bit of a we're in a Discord server together, and we're having a bit of a discussion. So, where would you say is where you're coming from with this debate? Like, what sort of position, firstly, would you say you're putting yourself like on the remit of politics and such? Like, where would you say you are?
For sure. So to begin, I've kind of changed my positions. So like when I was a teenager, high schooler in like mid 2010s, I was very like typical like Republican, partisan, conservative, that type of thing. But I got
Yeah.
very disillusioned with the hypocrisies and contradictions of oh, we're so patriotic, but yet we want billionaires to have more power. We don't want to seriously regulate and restrain the power of multinational corporations. So those contradictions and hypocrisies made me leave the mainstream conservative movement. However, with that being said, I wouldn't say that I went from that to just joining leftism as a whole, because I have some, and I'm sure you could tell based on our like brief conversation in like the server channel itself, but I just have issues with leftism when it comes to some of their like social, cultural views and sort of how they approach identity politics, specifically in the United States.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I reckon there's a lot of people who have your sort of rough trajectory, right? Like, you're brought up with, especially in a country like America, like just the sort of nationalism is just so prevalent, right? That you sort of, you take it for granted. It becomes like part of your regular like backdrop and such. And then as you get older, you sort of think, hang on a second, is all this what I want to be subscribing to? Is this my sort of preferred position? But it's interesting that you take issue with the sort of areas of the left I mean the left as I think we're going to come on to. It's quite a broad category, right? Like it's quite a big label. As are
Oh yeah, the whole like leftist infighting meme and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
well, everyone infights, right? There's no one set thing, but no, I suppose we could start with those issues. Like we could certainly pick one out to begin with. Like what stops you putting yourself comfortably in that left label? Like what are the issues that you feel are causing that issue for you, so to speak?
Yeah. So before I get into that, for the viewers here, we were talking for like a few minutes before the live, and I was agreeing with him when it comes to nationalism that if it's just pure abstraction and mythos and pride, when there's no actual like physical reality, then I'm against it. And I agree that it's that way of nationalism has been used as a weapon by economic elites and also people who actually believe in it. So with that being said, I think you're making the correct critique there. You're pointing out nationalism gone awry, used as a weapon by the elites. But I'm I think with the solution and maybe like your prescription, that's where I'm drawing issues from. Because during our conversation, you were saying that like national identity, different nations, that it's imaginary, it's a construct, and that I don't agree with at all. I think if we I think if we really like strip away like the institutions, the labels, I mean, what really are like nations and cultures? To me, you can think of them like spheres of socialization, that there are these like areas where people are socialize in a generally similar manner. So like their environment, their upbringing, language, their like cultural values. And I think we can clearly observe that these spheres, these areas of common socialization are real, they're very impactful, and they what can often fundamentally differ depending on where you are. So it's like what part of that is imaginary or like a construct? What do you mean by that?
Okay, so it's constructed in the sense that it's not like inherently in the land. It's not as though the people who are there are inherently born with something that says, yes, I am of this nation, I am of this culture. It's learned as you grow up. And to give an example, my country, the United Kingdom, obviously we have our British flags, the Union flag. It's quite we've got quite a strong national brand, so to speak. A lot of people, if you say what is a British person or a British symbol, there's lots of things you can quite quickly refer to. But this is not something which is like fixed throughout time. If we go back a few hundred years, you've got lots of different factions in the country that would have said, well, no, we're not British as such. What is Britain? We are the Kingdom of Wessex, the Kingdom of Sussex, the Kingdom of Mercia, and Yorkshire, Northumberland, loads of different areas which would have all wanted their own ideas, own accents, own dialects, regional traditions and such, which then get amalgamated into a national culture through the means of capital, of power, of acquisition of territory and such. And that isn't to say that it's not real. It's not as though you can hear my accent. I sound British. I've got British passport. There's clearly like a Britain that you can look at and say, okay, this is something which tangibly is real in our society. But it's not something which is inherent. It has been invented and sustained, and it didn't. The sort of evidence of that is the change. What has come before it was amalgamated or erased in some cases to make way for Britain. And I think that it's one thing when we talk about it in terms of just like any odd country, right? Britain, I don't think is that controversial in the sense that it's a place you can point to on a map. But when we see contested nationalities, when we see areas, certainly in the world, that combine with other sort of lenses of oppressions and such, like where nationalism lends itself to problematic stuff, is when you have that exclusive element, when it's used as a tool of hierarchy. I think we touched on it a second ago, right? Like the idea that if you are a person in power and you want to maintain that power, you turn the lens of nationalism onto the other. Britain is for the white race of white people. Therefore, if you're not white, you're not British. And we've seen throughout history that these nationalisms are weaponized through the lens of racism and xenophobia and such. But just to answer your question, they're invented, they're socially constructed because they aren't inherent properties. The stuff you listed about togetherness and stuff, that doesn't need the nation. The nation comes after that.
I understand. So I would disagree on your phrasing of constructed, invented, not inherent. So yes, culture and like identity does have a fluid and dynamic nature. At one point Japan was a feudal society run by the shogunate. Then the Meiji Restoration happened. Now they're how they are today. So yeah, obviously it's not like it's 100% fixed and static no matter what. But the reason I think you're miscalculating when you say invented and constructed is because, I mean, no matter what the time and place is, every like human society everywhere, whenever people are together for a long enough period of time, culture and values naturally emerge and develop. So when you say it's not inherent, I would disagree because I think it is a universal inherent phenomenon that culture and identity develop over time. Like whenever you say invented, it's not like someone in a specific time and place from like first principles like constructed or invented the idea of like an identity or a culture. Like these things just naturally universally developed as human societies got larger or stuck together. And even those who didn't have permanent settlements, nomadic people also have their own distinct cultures and identities. So I agree with the fluid and dynamic nature, but I don't agree that it's constructed or invented. I think that culture is something that's inherent to humans. I mean,
Well,
it's pretty much always existed.
I mean, in the sense that people do things that they associate with one another, and that becomes something that you label or identify with, right? But then that's quite broad. The nation is something which takes that and turns it into an exclusive. You know, we are this nation, not like them. We are of this national creed, separate and different to others. You know, because you can have like you know, like you said, like a nomadic village people. You know, maybe they've got a certain color they like. Maybe they have a certain song or dance they do. That's different to a nation, which is a much larger area for one, right, than just a small group or like a local community. A nation declaring itself, you know, we are this nation, we are of this amalgamation, and using that as a tool to power, a tool to hierarchy over others. Because inherently, you're sort of saying by declaring yourself a nation, oh well, this is us, we are not them. Yeah, this is how we define ourselves. Because you could have those cultures and those values and share it with others, right? Like if I play piano and I like singing songs and stuff, I can teach someone else that song. I can share that value. And if someone doesn't want to have that value, then that's fine. They can play a different instrument. And if they do, then you know that's great. I've got someone else I can share it with. But when you have a nation, when you have a nationality, that's not something that you can share. That's you're saying then, well, this is our nation, this is our identity. You must be of us. And that's where we have the link with, you know, for one, the problems of the past and the present with nationalism, and the introduction sort of wealth and capital, right? Because we're not talking about small like communities and sort of local customs and such. We're talking about massive projects of land and wealth that then are weaponized against others. Britain being a prime example, like we've got our islands, right? But it wasn't initially the whole island. It was many different kingdoms that were taken over, and then that expanded to Ireland. That expands to, you know, the colonies of the global south, and you know we're then looking at. I mean, my family, we're West Indian heritage, right? Like my grandparents come from Jamaica. Jamaica was not like you know, how did Jamaica become part of the British Empire, right? It had a British flag. It was part of Britain's territory, but it's taken over by people who are in search of more resources and land and such, right? So there's an element of danger to affixing ourselves to the national identity, because when we go down that path, we tie ourselves into that capitalistic mindset, that, you know, us over them, that hierarchy.
Yeah, so I think again, so you're correctly identifying the fluid and dynamic nature of all these things. You know, London was once Londinium under the Roman Empire. Obviously, it'd be crazy if like some Italian person came to London and they're like, "Oh, well, I should have control because like at one point I was in control of this land." I totally understand, but let's talk about the right here, right now. Yes, there are things that are fluid and dynamic, and yes, it's not like a nation is like some like foundational inherent thing that exists in the beginning of time or anything, but it doesn't change that, for example, the United States of America is a observable structure. um like all of us who were born and raised here have a unique and distinct form of socialization that people who were born outside of the United States, or rather people who were raised outside of the United States, don't have. And I feel like you're perhaps downplaying the importance and reality of those different forms of socialization. Like, I understand how exclusivity when it comes to identity can go awry. Like, if you start obsessing over, like, oh, we should do DNA tests, and if you're not like this 100% ethnicity, then you need to go. But at the same time, like, if I go to Greece and I try to tell like a local there who's lived there their whole life, like, oh, you being Greek, that's like not exclusive. It's like a imaginary construct. I mean, I don't really see how that's a viable way of thinking, because I mean there clearly is something that's distinct and exclusive about being
But
raised in that kind of environment, right? Like
I
how
mean,
is it
Greece.
not? How's it
I
not
mean,
something that
Greece is.
exclusive?
But Greece is an interesting example, right? Because Greece is not only imaginary, but look at the history, right? It wasn't Greece. It was dozens of island states and cultures and communities within the sort of archipelago and such, right? And then it becomes Greece. Even today, I mean, ask someone from that region of the world where Greece ends, say, and Macedonia begins, and there's going to be a bit of controversy and such. Like, there's not like a set thing. But America, it's not like an inherent American like socialization, is it? Because America, for one, is a very young country. Quite famously, obviously, there were people here before the United States of America that are still there, and obviously, the indigenous populations aren't exactly like the same. They wouldn't probably agree necessarily that there's like some culture that must exist through the USA or whatever. The socialization can still take place throughout the fixed national structures of America. When we're saying that it's invented and constructed and such, we're looking at how all the parts of society are wrapped up in national packages and then sold as something concrete and fixed. The idea that because you are American, that somehow makes you fundamentally different to Canada, Mexico, and then global South countries, which are relegated even further down. And that, as you say, no one. I don't think anyone's saying like it's 100% everyone who believes in their national identity is like the biggest colonialist ever. But it does, if you can sort of draw the path to it, leads to the really problematic stuff, the far right stuff that we're seeing in both our countries now, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, but downplaying and ignoring the right here, right now, real differences that exist between different cultures. That's also one of the reasons I think, like, the sort of like nativist right backlash is, especially in Western Europe, because think of it like this: like, you keep looking at like the history and being like, oh, well, the current right here, right now nations weren't always the way they were, and it's
Yeah.
like that's true, but right here, right now, for example, let's look at modern day Afghanistan. They're, it's a very brutally puritanical, repressive society. Um, they literally beat young boys with canes because they can't grow beards. They don't let women get educated after sixth grade. They have to cover up. They can't even leave the house. And it's like, okay, so if we're trying to have like an immigration policy, for example, like if you value like multiculturalism, at some point, dude, you're just gonna have to like look at the reality that that society right here, right now, their values, their general socialization is bad, and that it can,
But
if you let in massive amounts of people from there without vetting them, you're inevitably going to have culture clash and incompatibility. And it's like you're downplaying the right here, right now, extreme differences that exist between societies because, oh, well, like 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, it was something different. And it's like, yeah, but like, what about right now? I mean, how do you think, like gay people would react if thousands of Afghani men immigrated into their town when they've
I
spent
mean,
their
I
whole
feel like
lives in a
that's.
society where being gay is like a death sentence, right?
I mean, I feel like that's like not really. Whether I mean, firstly, whatever your view on immigration is, like, it still doesn't change that like Afghanistani culture isn't like a fixed inherent thing. Like, it's ultimately Afghanistan's quite a large landmass, right? Like, there's no
Yeah, I
inherent
know,
thing.
I know,
But
but
secondly,
I'm talking about like the right here, right now. I think that's the problem here. I understand in the early 70s, if you went to Kabul, the Taliban wasn't in control. It wasn't this brutally repressive society. You actually had a decent amount of development. But unfortunately, like right now, that's not the case. The way they're being socialized is extremely bad. And like, I
but
just,
like,
I don't
firstly, that's
understand
not.
how like,
That isn't like a yeah, sure. Obviously, right now the regime in Afghanistan is terrible. But firstly, that
yeah,
doesn't mean that every single person is exactly going to have exactly the same output
mm,
because of that. Because obviously
I
not.
know.
Because national identity is not a fixed like inherent thing. Secondly, I really don't think that saying 1,000 Afghanistani people showing up somewhere is going to have some danger. Like, you can't use that as a judgment because you could also just as equally say 1,000 Republicans moving into your town would have the same effect, right? Because they also share some pretty horrendous viewpoints and have terrible
Yeah,
ideas about LGBT people, right? Like, but so there's
wait,
no like
but
in.
you just agreed to my premise. Like you
I
just
didn't
said,
agree to
oh,
your premise, but you
Republicans,
can't.
but you said
You can't.
Republicans may have,
The point is, like, people who have ideas about certain beliefs aren't something you can just say, oh, well, they're from this place, therefore they are bad. Like, there's no inherent, oh yes, this is the Afghanistan socialization. But it's also, I don't think, particularly relevant to what we're really discussing here, right? Because we're not saying, oh, all nations are the same, they're all exactly identical. What we're saying is national identity is something which is cultivated. You know, someone being raised in one country, having a different experience and potentially different social views, doesn't mean that they have a fixed like national quality inside them, which gives you an indication as to their whole personality. I also think that Afghanistan, as with any regime that is authoritarian, probably has a lot of people that would love to leave the country and leave that system, or better yet, have a better government in place. Same as with any country that experiences a hateful, regressive authoritarian regime. I think that
So
it's easy.
okay, to
I think
clarify,
that it's easy. It's easy to single out Afghanistan because it's a global South country. It's got a lot of people that are non-white and have been racialized negatively, and there's lots of Islamophobia and xenophobia in society. So it's easy to make the look at what if all these scary people moved to your neighborhood and had bad views. But it falls apart when you could take any group of people with a like it's not as though the only people who are anti-LGBTQ come from the Middle East, right? You only have to look at any conservative party ever to find that. It's a society currently in control by far-right conservatives. That's why it's nothing to do with the national question.
okay, so to clarify, I don't at all believe in like a literal blanket. Every individual is immediately this way because of the country that they're from, but we can clearly make like generalized statements if there's like a unified form of socialization that is very, very negative. Like we can say on average, for example, that people in America value individualism more than people in China because we can look at the
Can
you
we say
don't think
that?
so?
I mean,
Yes.
we can
I mean, dude,
we
China
can
China
guess
for
that, but that's
thousand
not.
it's not a guess. I mean, the entire Chinese civilization, Confucianism is one of their foundational values that they've been reinforcing for generations. Confucianism versus the worldviews and values that the American founding fathers had are drastically different. So it's like, I mean, how would you not say that in general, more people would subscribe to the values that they were raised and taught?
I mean,
Like,
you can say
that doesn't make any sense.
more people in China, which has obviously a more centralized system
Higher
of
proportion
government
of
sense.
people, in my
Right?
opinion.
There's a greater chance that they have shared the views they have been potentially led towards from their education system. That isn't the same thing as saying, well, we they're all they're all Chinese, all been taught in China, therefore they have the same thing, and everyone in America thinks
I know,
this way.
I
Like it's
agree.
people's national, like the systems they reside within isn't the same thing as their like national identity and make them such. And like to an extent, I can see what you're saying, right? Like obviously in America and in other Western countries, like we subscribe to a more individualistic consumer, like you are your own person, you must go about your life and such, of course. But that isn't the same thing as like a national character that is inherent within us and is found in societies and such. Like that's something that's been socially learned. Like even within that example, right? Like the governments and ideas and economies of those countries have massively influenced what has been taught as national identity. Like America puts the flag in all its schools and you pledge allegiance and stuff, right? Like so that influences massively. That's a choice that's been made. That's not like we did this because we are American.
But
Like that's
but
been
yeah,
consciously done.
that's my point though. The reality of people's socialization and influence generally impacts people in the population, and the way that people are
Yeah, of course it
socialized
impacts
drastically
them.
differ. Yeah.
But that's
So
social construction though. That's not like a thing which is inherent. That's been learned and taught, and that could be stopped. Like it's not as though if you reset the clock, people would just do that exactly the same way because it's in their genes. Like it's just something that's been taught ultimately.
yeah, no, I agree, and I think that, for example, modern Afghanistan. Obviously, I have an extremely negative opinion on it, but it doesn't. Again, I never once claimed that it's like a fixed ontological necessity that Afghanistan is like a terrible place to live. Like there could be development, there could be reform, there could be change, but it's like right here, right now. these people, this socialization is like extremely negative and it's a very repressive society. So I just, whenever we have like this real world like immediate difference, I feel like just, I don't know how much like practical value there is in just being like, oh, but like the whole thing is like a social construct and it's like all fundamentally imaginary. I guess my question to you is like, in those societies that I'm talking about, ones where it's like very underdeveloped, where you have a lot of very like harmful customs, such as like female genital mutilation in some place in sub-Saharan Africa. I guess like, what's the goal there then? Like, how do you think that we can make those societies developed and actually be good places to live for their citizens?
Well, for one, those countries are in the global south, right? And they don't have the resources we have in our countries to be able to put in better, structures and education and such, because of the centuries of colonialism and such. We can't disconnect it from that fact, right? The reason those countries are less stable is because of the centuries that came before it. So the things you need to put in place to improve things, education, resources, infrastructure, democratic functions and such, come through addressing. How's that a hand wave? Like, do you not agree?
I'm iffy on the democratic part.
Well, because I mean, democracy is important, right? Everyone being able to participate fairly in their country's organization and functioning, but all of that comes through measures which inevitably challenge the distribution of wealth, right? Like for those countries to have those things in their place, that needs things to be invested into it, right? And a lot of that not happening is because many of those countries, resources exist for Western corporations to use as their playthings, right? I mean, you only have to look at sub-Saharan African countries that are basically just big farms and mines for for Western corporations to basically count their pennies off. And so doing that requires people to think, okay, rather than seeing us as competing countries on the market and our growth is more important than anything else and we can only think of our own people and such, we've got to work collaboratively as the human race and say, okay, we want everyone to enjoy a good quality of life, whether or not you're from Britain, America, or Afghanistan, or Sudan, or wherever, and make sure the world is like that, and be materially fair with our resources and not hoard them as a nation. And by a nation, I mean the corporations and wealthy in our nations, because it's not like you and I are in control of the wealth. But doing that requires us to move away from, oh, Britain needs to have its place and Britain needs to get better of deals and stuff and America needs to be the world lead. Like, we need to be thinking in terms of the wider human population instead of dividing ourselves nationally.
I don't know. I think it's interesting that you critiqued national identity and nationalism as being too sort of impersonal and abstract. And I have to think to myself, what can be more impersonal and abstract than just being like, oh, well, we'll do away with national identity and we'll just embrace like this global single identity. It's like, okay, well, if the nation is, but if the nation is like too big of an abstraction for people's like regular lives in their communities, I mean, okay, then how are you gonna like get people unite on like this global sense? I mean, that seems like an even bigger abstraction.
But objectively, we are a planet of people. We are a human race. Whereas subjectively, we have these nations that have been sort of constructed and such, right? Like, ultimately, we can recognize materially that we all exist as a planet and have to work together, particularly with things like climate change and world problems that we need to actually, we can't not treat. Like, the atmosphere doesn't care for our nations, right? Like, it doesn't matter who's doing the polluting, we're all going to face the consequences of it, right? So we need to, on some level, have to move past nations if we're going to solve some of these problems. Why not think about that in terms of everything? But, I get what you're saying. It's tricky to imagine all 8 billion people, but communities can still exist. Like, you can still think, okay, well, I can't see every single person on the planet, but my local community can still do its bit and help and such. Regardless, if we're going to address, like you said, the problems in the global south and such, we need to address the failings of capitalism. That happens when we deconstruct nationalism and the idea that the nation comes before all. Because one of the issues with, you say like, oh yes, look at Afghanistan, it's a struggling society, it's not very good. And then, people don't want to be there, so refugees are fleeing and they're turned away because, oh, Britain is full. America can't take any more, which is nonsense, right? Because obviously these countries are not like struggling if you really think about it. You know, there's clearly enough resources for people to, you know, especially like former army personnel that helped the US military and then get told, no, sorry, you can't come in, gotta stay back in Afghanistan. Terrible. The point though is that they aren't like different fundamentally from us. They're just people. You know, there's not whatever has happened in their country's history doesn't change the fact that we're all just human beings. Like if you and I lived if we were suddenly neighbours, like I'm not going to wake up and think, oh well, you know, you're American. Oh my goodness, like what am I going to do? Like it doesn't fundamentally change anything. Like, and it's the same thing for someone from Afghanistan. Like it's not as though you can just inherently have some difference. It's learnt, and so it can be learnt differently in a different context without nationalism sort of treating it as like some fixed reality.
Yeah, again, like I get what you're saying. This very like high level, like we're all one race, the human race. But
But
I
I
think
mean, it's fun.
some of the
It's true,
reasons
right? Go ahead. Sorry.
I think some of the reasons that in Europe and America there's a lot of sort of nativism, a sort of like backlashes. Like you're clarifying and under like you're clarifying and laying out your beliefs like that it's like different cultures and societies are fluid and dynamic and constructed, but that at least like right here right now like it is there is a real impact, and that you can say like in a general sense some people may think a certain way depending on their socialization. But my concern is when it comes to like immigration policy and the ideas of multiculturalism, I feel like sort of this we're all one race, human race, different cultures are like a construct. I feel like it just there's just a serious lack of practical thinking there. I know it seems discomforting, but listen, some societies, and this isn't permanent, this isn't inherent, but at any given moment, some societies, some cultures, some values are better than others. And that's just how it is. It doesn't
Okay, but
have to
that's
be this
not no.
way.
That isn't, even if that was true. Like that isn't inherently tied to nations and national identity. But secondly, you said saying nativism's on the rise in Europe and America. There's better societies, whatever. Europe and
I guess what
America,
I'm
Europe and America are have centuries of racism. Our countries are directly responsible for the wealth inequality between the global north and global south. My country, Britain, had what 1/3 of the world's land area was in control of the British Empire. Like that is obviously an impact in why, firstly, all the wealth is in our nations, and people want to why we have more pull factors than push factors in terms of movement. And then secondly, why, because like capitalism is not just like an economic system; it makes cultural strides too. Racism and race are invented to go alongside the nation and say, well, we are the civilized parts of the world. We have all this great civilization. Other nations are less than us. They're bad. They're full of black people who are racially inferior or whatever. That blends with the nationalism, like we were saying earlier. That creates the racial nativism that lets people then say, well, we need to protect our way of life because we're a better culture, not like Afghanistan or whatever other country, ignoring the turmoil that our nations have created by taking tons of resources and leaving unstable power structures and all the other horrible stuff that's happened, right? Like that is the thing to focus on, not the, like ultimately, obviously, a country that has segregation within living memory for some people is going to have a problem like when other non-white people start showing up and people that also aren't included in the American identity, right? Like, how can you
okay.
focus on
So
them?
because the problem is that whenever you have mass unfettered immigration and you don't prioritize some semblance of assimilation, so to speak, what will end up happening is that these groups coming in large numbers in a very short period of time, what ends up happening is they start forming these almost like racial enclaves within a different nation. And what ends up happening is that you get this rise of tribalism and myopic thought where within these racial enclaves, it's like these people are almost socialized in like an
So,
artificial racial bubble where they only care about themselves. And it's like, okay, how can some people simultaneously be like, yeah, we want like the working class to have like unity and solidarity, also we're gonna just like have like billions of people coming in and not like vet them properly, and then have a bunch of problems with like tribalism. And it's like, if I was an economic elite and I wanted to have a society that's easy to exploit, I feel like a society that's low trust, that has a bunch of like tribalism and these racial enclaves, as I mentioned before. I feel like that kind of society would be much easier to exploit in general than one that has like genuine like solidarity and unity when it comes to their like general culture. Like,
I mean, I think blaming immigrants for the fact that a lot of them have ended up. Well, I mean, that's what you're doing, right? You're saying, oh, well, there's not this
no.
assimilation and such. The fact that we've ignored the fact that rent is privately controlled and skyrocketed,
Okay,
redlining,
let me
like, well,
phrase
it's
it
true.
like
No, well,
this. It's not.
hold on a
Let
second,
me.
because in America and in other countries, were the immigrants and the ethnic minorities and such allowed to actually go and live it alongside the native population or whatever? And the answer is no. Were they able to access the same welfare resources and schools and such? The answer is no. So how can you blame populations which are marginalised having to live in enclaves, as you call them, which isn't even always true, by the way. Like, I know for a fact lots of cities are quite diverse and have lots of different nationalities living amongst each other. Like, but you can't blame people who aren't given the same access to stuff for congregating in the same areas and then being told they aren't assimilating, right?
Okay, this isn't like late immigrants are bad, they're the problem, but just try to think practically. If you have like a nation or just like a structure where there's like a similar sphere of socialization, people have a similar language, they're raised in a similar environment, they exist under the same institutions. Just think practically. If you let in a large number of people from a bunch of different spheres of socialization, and I'm saying the problem isn't that there are immigrants, I'm saying the problem is if you let in a mass amount of people in a short period of time and you don't vet them properly, you don't make sure, like, hey, there's a chance that someone coming from a society believes in like some like backwards cultural value there, which does exist. And it's like, if you do immigration that way, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when it's impractical, when it's just a lot of people in a short period of time, when you're not vetting people properly. It will inevitably cause cultural clashes. It will just cause animosity between the immigrant groups and the people of the nation.
None of that is
And
inherently
like,
to do with the nation, though, is it? Because you have backwards views in the country right now, right? Like,
right,
you've
okay,
got.
sure, but then why import
So
more?
then how can you say, well, you're not importing more? And it's people's freedom to move, isn't it? Right? Like, there's no. Not
Oh,
only
what?
is it's their freedom to move. Why is it for one nation to say, well, only we can decide who comes here, and it's like the third largest landmass on the whole planet in America, right?
So you think
Like,
like there should be no, okay, wait. So you think like anyone any can just go anywhere and there should be no like sense of like borders or security anywhere?
is it keeping you secure? You've got
Well,
corporations in
no,
your
because it's
country
not
right
secure enough.
now. You've got corporations in your country right now putting pipelines down, cutting down forests, the death penalty, ICE. But the thing making you insecure are like one family from Mexico, some Afghanistani refugees trying to
And
escape the
there it
Taliban.
is. That's why I'm not a lefty, because you think that it's an either or. You think it's like, oh, if you criticize immigration and the negative effects that can happen, oh, why don't you also like dislike like the billionaires and the corporations? It's like, no, dude, I'm talking about both.
No, okay,
Like
but you're not though because you're
like
talking about okay, but you can't. You're going on about
like
oh
if
yes, we've got to
billionaire no, no,
assimilate,
no,
we've got to be
I agree.
socialized.
I agree,
Yeah,
billionaires and
so then
corporations have too much control over society, and one of the ways that makes a society easier to exploit is if you mess your immigration policy up and you let in way too many people in a short period of time, and then you have all this division and internal clashes. Like, do you not see that these are all connected? Like, it's like you're trying
yeah,
to create like a separate either or, where it's
okay,
like,
but they're not. The connection isn't like. you're saying, oh well, people moving in, they don't speak the language and don't have cultural values which are the
Yeah,
same as
like
ours, might cause an issue.
that literally
But
makes a society more
that's not an
divided.
inherent national thing. That is also true within your own country, between people of the same nationality. So how can you only focus? How can you say, oh well, we need to have an immigration policy, like when there's no like inherent link between where someone's from and their values? Not inherently, not something that's innate within them. But secondly, also, like, how can you also ignore the fact that these nations aren't like fixed things? And in America's case, certainly, right? Like American history is littered with what killing off and exterminating the local population in to make way for slave plantations and God knows what else, right? So the idea that you can then turn around and say, well, you're not assimilating to our culture, you can't come in, we've got to secure our borders to
Yeah.
be safe. Like you said earlier, that's just absurd. Like ultimately, if you want to promote justice and good values and such, there's got to be something for everyone, not just like exclusively aimed at those, like vetting people who are coming in. Like, why don't you vet
Okay,
people who were
but
there already? You know?
okay, but it's just like you're saying like, okay, these like far right kind of like Christian white nationalists are bad because they have like a very like backwards like puritanical mindset, but also like we totally shouldn't try to like limit those kinds of people from other nations coming in and increasing the number of those bad values. That makes literally no sense.
Okay,
Obviously,
so
when letting people in, like we're like if you are against like a crazy like Christian fundamentalist person, I would assume you're also against other like extreme religious fundamentalists from different societies. Obviously,
absolutely,
you want
yeah, we
yeah, so that's what I mean by vetting. Like we obviously from an external standpoint, yes, there's crazy people within like a nation, but why would you not also make sure that you don't let in more crazy people?
okay, but the way to stop far right, fundamentalist authoritarian types isn't to say, oh well, we have to stop. Like and you said earlier, 1,000 Afghanistani people. Like that isn't a good way of fixing it, is it? Because you don't know. You just make an assumption because you've heard the name
It's
Afghanistan.
just I'm trying to
There's
explain to you
just
like
okay,
it's
but
a
you're not
general
explaining though
thing.
because you're missing the you're you're missing the the actual sort of critique of ideology and such, and focusing on nationality when that's not the thing that's the issue. Also, they wouldn't come to Western nations if there wasn't a massive wealth in divide. Part of the issue is that Western nations have, as we've said, for as much as you're saying, oh, it's history, but it's not history because we're still much, much wealthier than the rest of the world. So if they, ultimately, if you don't want the majority of immigration happening towards our nations, redistribute the wealth, make things fairer again, And obviously, that's not just saying give $1 billion to X government here, there, and everywhere, right? Like obviously, as a left wing person, we're thinking in terms of like, properly structuring the world in terms of democracy and social democracy and not social democracy, like workers in control of what they have produced and such. Like obviously we're in critique of capitalism, but that is not the same thing as like, oh, well, these people have backwards cultures because they are of nation X, and therefore we're going to unscrupulously look at what's happening there and not focus on like for as much as you're saying like, oh, we got to do it's not an either or. Like if we've got a national standard or policy or whatever, that inherently creates the hierarchy that allows far right Christian traditionalist types to fly under the radar because they're of the same nation of us, whilst you're putting thousands of billions of pounds into the immigration task force, which vet the immigrants, inevitably, creating a trickier time for people to move around. When ultimately that freedom should be something we strive for. We shouldn't be constrained by ultimately imaginary lines. The differences are not as profound as we think, and they're learned and can be unlearned. You talk about learning languages. You can learn a language if you put the resources
Okay.
there. People can learn together.
I just
Go
have a
ahead.
quick question. So, have you like traveled to other nations at all?
I've
Like been
tra-
to like the global south?
I've not been to the global south. No, I've been in Europe, where the Schengen area in the EU, you can get from one country to. Well, I say that I had been in Europe, where before Britain left the EU, but the Schengen area in EU countries, you can get from one to the other without having to go through tons of checks. Turns out it's not that much of a scary concept, right? Like you're not. The differences between nations are not that serious, you can.
Okay, but to be fair, like you can admit like at least like with the EU, I mean, there's an obvious like similarity, and there's also like
What's the obvious
legal
similarity?
aspects to it.
What's the
Um,
obvious similarity?
the similarity is that they're all, I mean, in a geographical sense, they all share the same continent. In a cultural sense, I would say like there's a very like vague civilizational root with Europe. But the reason I brought that up is because you seem to like keep mixing up whenever I'm making like generalized statements and talking about disproportionalities with me just saying like, oh, all people are like immediately this way and it's inherent. That's not what I believe, but the generality is real. So I have been to the global south. I mentioned that my parents are from South Asia earlier in our conversation, so I've visited there a bunch of times. Obviously, not every Indian man is like a pervert or like some things like that. Obviously not, but because that society has some very unfortunate like values and customs in general when it comes to like women, for example. Whenever I go there, my sister has to be a lot more careful in the way she dresses and the way she like presents herself in a way that she doesn't have to in America. Whenever I'm walking with her along the towns, I see the way that people in general like stare at her in a way that I don't see here. So it's like that's what I'm trying to tell you when it comes to borders and immigration. Is like I understand you have like we're all one race, the human race. Trust me, if we could all like right here, right now, stop hating each other, all just hold hands. I understand, I get it, but it's like we have to be pragmatic sometimes. Like there are just societies and cultures in general where if we want to have like massive amounts of people coming in, there's going to have to be some actual like care and actual vetting. I mean, one of my own relatives has lived in America for 30 or so years. I mean, she doesn't even know English, but more importantly, I overheard her talking with one of my other relatives in like their native language. And she was saying like, oh, I wouldn't want my grandson to like marry someone outside of their like caste and like, oh, the caste system, this and that. And I'm like, dude, like, I'm sorry, like, I don't want that here. Like we obviously need like some level of vetting and some level of security because right here, right now, and I understand oftentimes it is due to things like colonialism. I get it, but like it doesn't change that those societies exist right here, right now. They have very unfortunate cultural values and a higher proportion of the people may believe those values. So we can't just literally have open borders and anyone anywhere can just come in.
Okay, but
Like
that's
I've
not.
dealt with the reality of being and visiting in a like developing society. Like,
Okay, but
and
that's
you
not.
haven't.
That's not the. That's not India. That's conservatism. Because what obviously, yeah, as you describe, that's more prevalent in some places because they're more conservative because they have more patriarchal, systems, right? That is not something that is unique to Indian culture. That was seen in Western nations, and sure, Western nations are not as conservative in some ways, but then at the same time, look what's happening now with our right wing parties, right? I mean, look at all the horrible stuff that's happening, from conservatives in
Again,
our
I'm
country.
just I'm
I mean,
just
you can shake
describing
your head,
like
but like, there's ultimately not. The point isn't. I don't think you can. How can you? What you described there is absolutely valid, right? Like the idea that in some places in the world, there's a heightened sense of danger. That isn't inherent, and that doesn't mean that we've got to control all our immigration now because we don't want random nationality coming in, right? That is something to say. Okay, some parts of the world have political structures in place which are more conservative, and therefore lead to the kinds of societies where people are raised to devalue certain marginalized groups. Believe in caste systems. Like you're talking about Europe and saying, oh well, Europe's got a shared culture. Well, European nations and groups fought for centuries. Have a look at European history in the Middle Ages and medieval period and Renaissance, like and even World War Two, right? Like there's the idea that Europe's just inherently got some shared cultural identity is just nonsense because like look at the state of it for the vast majority of history. But when people decide actually we can put this to a side and just actually have a nicer time if we work together, you get there. And now if you're in, and also like you say, oh, it's just one continent, but quite big, isn't it? It's not as though you can just walk like.
Okay,
It's not
to
just because.
clarify, the only reason I said that is because I was trying to be like, yeah, I know you've traveled all over Europe, but the differences between those areas and the differences between that and like somewhere in the global south, like India or like those, that's like a way bigger difference. That's the only reason I said that. I don't literally mean like Europe is like all the same or like anything like that. I'm just saying like those differences are clearly not as much as the difference between them and like a place in the
But you
global
don't
south.
know that
But
though.
wait.
You don't
But
know
another
that.
major but another thing you keep doing is just like, dude, I'm not saying like everyone in like one society is like everyone's just horrible and evil and bad. And it's like I'm trying to explain to you that there are some societies where like the proportion of those people is much higher, and you're like, oh, but like those people also exist in the West, and like they're bad. And it's like, okay, sure, but then like how does like have not having secure borders and like being careful about
No, because
who
the
we
fact
let in,
that
like how does that make any sense?
the
Like where
fact
does that
that
logic come
okay,
from?
the fact that it's conservative, right wing thought that's producing this makes us think, okay, rather than just focusing on national identity and the nation and such and ethnicity, we should instead be thinking, okay, let's focus on why conservative discourse and patriarchal discourse and such and anti-LGBTQ and such, like why that leads to this, and then thinking, okay, it ties back into hierarchy and power. Societies in which, say, women aren't allowed to do anything are societies where all their labor is just free because you've designed it to be like, oh, this is the natural state of your gender. So, in Afghanistan, for instance, people focus on, oh, it's their culture, it's their culture. They ignore the fact that the men who have written these rules benefit massively in terms of their economic standing because they don't have to worry about all the stuff that they've delegated to the weaker sex or whatever, right? A society where there's a caste system where people are of lower caste are also societies where, again, you can delegate all the jobs you don't want to think about to people who are delegated that status in life. These things come materially. These reasons these things happen aren't because, oh, they're from this place or they have this certain way of life. It's something that's artificial. It's learned. And so rather than starting to reinforce those divides between areas and saying, oh, well, you're from this country so you can't come in or whatever, we should be interrogating the ideology because the same things happen. And yeah, sure, there's not as much conservative patriarchal attitudes to the extent they're enforced in Western nations, but leave it to the conservatives and we'll get there. Look at all the stuff that gets repealed in the US at the moment. Look at the current platform of Reform UK in the UK, who are unfortunately first in many of our polls, though granted with like 24% or whatever, so not like a public matters report or whatever, but still in a good position. We can't focus on nations when the world over the issue isn't inherently the nation, it's conservative discourse. And has your nation been under a conservative social process? In some nations, yes, so they see a greater proportion of people who believe women shouldn't have rights and gay people don't have the right to exist or whatever. And in nations where they're less conservative, where there's been social progress, where progressive ideas and left-wing ideas have came to the fore, that isn't as much the case. But as we see, if we don't safeguard it and we don't take ourselves to keep on moving forward, then that's at risk as well.
Okay, so on one hand, again, like we have these Christian white nationalist conservatives, but yet we also like anyone can like go anywhere and no one should have like borders or security. It's like, well,
Why do you keep saying security?
Because I want security from like some Islamic fundamentalist extremists. Like, I don't understand. Why would I?
That could just as equally come from. That could be an American Islamic fundamentalist. That could, I mean, in saying that like violence and stuff, that is just as likely, if not more likely, to come from, I don't know, like an ice raid gone wrong, climate change, corporate pipeline blows up, as it does. Immigrant comes into the country and does unspeakable act. Like it's. Do you see it's a bit of a sketch?
But the deeper point with what I was going to say is, despite all the things I've said, it's not like those societies are inherently or permanently that way. there there's a chance, it's possible that they can become developed. So with Singapore, we saw Lee Kuan Yew. Singapore was a very impoverished country. Shortly after they were forced into independence by Malaysia, they had all sorts of like racial animosity and whatnot. But Lee Kuan Yew's leadership, the PAP, the People's Action Party, through extremely good governance, through developmentalism, Singapore became a first world society, so to speak. So whenever I'm making these critiques, I'm not saying that it has to be that way or that there's no way that they can like become developed and get rid of a lot of those like harmful values and ideologies. I'm just saying that, I mean, we can work on doing that, sure, but they still exist. And because they exist right here, right now, we still have to like have some level of like security and vetting when it comes to who comes in here. This is what I mean with, you kind of like treat things like the separator, they're an either or when they're not. Like on one hand, I can say that Afghanistan, they had the Soviet invasion in the late 70s. Then, there was the Mujahideen shit show in the 80s. And that was kind of America's thing with like the neocons and all that. But at the same time, like, there's still like a lot of people in Afghanistan who are unfortunately socialized and taught a very backwards mindset. And I don't want them to be able to just come here freely. Like, I believe in both of those things at once. And I feel like it's strange that you're just saying, oh, we'll just have like open borders and like security is like apparently bad now when it comes to people from other nations.
But why is your idea of security tied to this though? Like, because you could, like, sure, you don't want someone coming into the country that has ideas which are negative and bad and such, right? But as we've already discussed, that is just as capable of happening from someone moving to your state that came from like the most religious, most like far right enclave, KKK outpost or whatever in deep south, right? So there's no like the idea that it's tied to the nation is one which is a wrong one, right? Because it's not that. Well, secondly, it is, isn't it? Because like you're talking about security and we got to protect our borders, but the border only exists for the state, the capital and land and wealth and such to enforce itself. It's not something that actually protects us. We're just people that happen to be inside that state. We are, as we've gone over, there's tons of things which are far bigger security threats to us, like climate change, which I don't know if you've seen a picture of Britain recently, but like we barely have any green, like it's all just like dead grass.
Do you have air conditioning?
We do not have air conditioning. No, I'm roasting. The reason we're doing this at 9:30 is because it's unbearable. There's no way I could have done this earlier.
Damn.
But you know what I mean, right? Like there's corporate law being deregulated, and now they don't have to check what chemicals they pump into our chickens or whatever. The water regulations being scrapped, so now there's like E. coli and stuff in the drinking water. Like, that is far bigger a threat, right? But that doesn't get the same animation as the idea of the scary brown migrant coming in and being in a, what was it you called him, like a Islamic fundamentalist or whatever. Like, it doesn't have the same animation because it's not racialized. It doesn't have the same emotive pull as the constructed importance of the nation. That because that person, that danger could come from any one of things, and from people inside the national identity. It isn't something which, because the danger to our lives is not, as we can clearly see, just tethered to, well, where are you from? We should be moving away from that as a means to organise ourselves. And again, we should also stress that freedom of movement is an important freedom that we would not like if it was suddenly taken away from us inside our areas. And ultimately, the more we're able to, work together, like as a globe, as a community and such. And yeah, we are a global community, even if we don't want to admit it or can see it as such. And think the closer we can get to actually addressing conservative fundamentalism and such, or climate change, or any of the world's big issues.
Okay, so I'm just trying to think, because earlier you said it's not tied to the nation. Like, for example, when I was like critiquing like Afghani society, like,
yeah,
how is it not tied to the nation? Because even if the nation is like an invented construct, I mean, they're still like actively teaching people and influencing them to
Well,
be a certain way, right?
even
So
that, right? Like,
I say it's tied to the nation in that sense, in like their upbringing, they were socialized in a certain way. I don't know if I'm not saying it's tied to the nation, like just like inherently or ontologically, like every individual there will be a certain way, but it's clearly like being extremely influenced and shaped by the culture and environment that they grew up in. Like I don't like that's like you would admit that, right?
yeah, but Afghanistan isn't like a homogenous. Every single person is doing exactly the same thing, right? Like,
Yeah,
sure,
and I just
there's
said that
plenty
I
of
don't believe every single
okay,
person is the
but
way.
okay. So if you don't believe that, then how can you say like if 1,000 people from Afghanistan, showed up, they're not all gonna be exactly the same. Therefore, placing like seeing they're from Afghanistan, let's put extra scrutiny, and not okay, there's people whose push factor is they've left a conservative repressive country, they've come to a country that has freer status, though obviously not if you belong to certain marginalized groups. We should be analyzing things differently to here's their nation, therefore we can stop them from entering. When I also think as well that we're not sort of touching on, which we should be, what is the right of the state, which is masquerading as the community of all these people, to block people from just coming in and say, well, you don't get to be here, you do get to be here. You get to enter this tiny little pocket of space whilst corporation XYZ owns tons and tons of land. It's a silly thing to focus on. There's people in the chat that are sort of taking very fast sides. And one of them, where is it? Asman Muzz seems to agree with you here. The border protects the citizens, of course it does, but it's it's not like we said a moment ago, right? Like the border is there for the state and the land and such, right? Like it's not what is being
but
protected.
do you think there should literally be? But do you think there should literally be no border at all? Like no borders anywhere, no vetting, no anything.
Well, you wouldn't even notice the borders in places where I don't have an RC on screen. You wouldn't even notice the borders. In parts of the world where we've where's the resources to manage society in a healthier way. So if you share those resources up, it's it's not an issue. Like it's not like we say, Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, like countries that have the resources to manage people in them and have welfare and schools and hospitals and roads and stuff. Like there's no issue. You wouldn't probably notice if I didn't tell you where the border was. You wouldn't know when you'd crossed it. It's only where it becomes such a divide and where resources are kept from people that you see societies that are again conservative ones have negative views, which then lead to stuff. And I'll also stress again, I don't think that it's such a you're downplaying massively the danger from within the national identity of people, the nationalists themselves, right? But also like someone who has someone who is an American can just drive to your state right now and do all the same things that you're worried these supposed 1,000 people from Afghanistan can do, right? But not be deported because they are of the nation. So it's like there's no the idea that national identity is something to organise around is silly. I will say that we did have there's other topics we wanted to discuss, right? There's we'll do questions at the end, I reckon. But yeah, if you wanted to,
I guess just like
quickly, but
I guess just some like other points. I don't know. I feel like you're having trouble between like understanding like per capita and disproportionality and then just like blanket statements. Like if there is a society where it is normalized and taught to the population, for example, that women are second class citizens, and then there's a society where people are taught and it is normalized that men and women are equal. Obviously, not every individual in these societies all think the exact same thing. However, don't you think if I took 1,000 people in this society where it's widespread that women are second class citizens and they're being taught that, and I take 1,000 people in this society where they're taught that men and women are equal, do you not think that a higher proportion of the 1,000 people in the first society would have that kind of mindset than the other one. It's not a matter of, oh, if I take 1,000 Afghani men, they're just all evil and horrible. But it's that if you take 1,000 men from those societies, you can accurately gauge that a higher proportion of those people would probably believe those values because they grew up and were socialized with those values being normalized and mainstream.
I mean, the
And I feel
premise
like
is. Go ahead, sorry.
it's just per capita. It's just disproportionality. Like
Okay,
it's
but
not a matter of all
regardless of.
individuals are this way. It's like I keep bringing that up, and you're like, oh, but it's like all individuals aren't this way, and it's like, yeah, I know that wasn't my point, but there's like a higher proportionality of those people. It's just weird to me because
But it's not.
you're fearing the internal, but you're fearing the internal threat of like a extreme
Absolutely, I am. Yeah, of
fundamentalist
course.
a national
100%.
person. But wait,
It's
then
not
you're
some.
like, but
It's
then
not
you're
immigrants
just
that are taking away
ignoring.
my rights. It's not
Okay,
immigrants
no, but I'm
that's taking
saying
my
like,
rights.
but I'm saying there's something about those people's values that you consider them a threat from like within. Sure, but then why aren't you applying that same logic for the people who believe that from outside? Like if someone has the same kind of mindset as like a extreme like religious nationalist, why would you want them to be allowed in your communities? If you're already having a problem with those kinds of people within your community, it's like
Well,
where's
for
the logic
one, they're
there?
not like our community is not the entire country for one, right? So it's not as though they're personally, even if you accept every single like flawed and wrong premise that was just said, Ben, right? Like we're not. It's not as though like 1,000 people are showing up to my personal room, like my flat, and saying like, "You're right, okay." They're all saying of you, you've got to like responsible for all these people. Like, of course not. We're thinking that we have the power to just say, this is our land and stuff. And ultimately, these are, invented constructs, taken the entire space of it. Like they can still live in a place. Like ultimately, we shouldn't be stopping someone from just being able to move around. Now, what they do when they're in the country, same with anyone, should be, something we should discuss as a community. People with conservative views that do bad things, yeah, there should be some sort of response. But that can come through education and through cooperation and community. For as much as you're saying about community, if people were genuinely able to participate fairly in a democratic society, then half the issues would stop because it's like, okay, well, I can see that I'm living amongst people of different nationalities and genders and sexualities and ethnicities and such, and actually it's not so bad. Half the issue is, like we sort of said earlier, immigrants come and are unable to access half the stuff that we take for granted, end up living together with other people of the same original background and such, and that allows for conservative manipulators to come in and then use their same way as how the nation has nationalism. The nationalism of their own country and the conservatism of their own country gets reproduced in said societies, but that is also not an inherent thing. Like you can't, whether or not you think more people might have a regressive, you can't stop. You can't like apply an extra scrutinous lens to someone just based on their national country of origin. Like ultimately, that isn't something which is a sensible thing to do. And crucially, it's like surely people like if you're leaving a country like Afghanistan, then chances are like you're getting away from the not very nice regime there. And critically again as well, like in the same way that not every British school or American school is exactly the same and going to have the same people in it. Like it isn't. You can't use the nation as a medium to say, well, this is how it is for for people that are there. Therefore, we can, we can apply the the vetting process to these people and not our own population with its problems. It's just a silly way to organize. The world and ourselves, and it just stops us from moving forward as a planet, basically.
Okay, so to clarify, when I'm talking about like vetting and regulations and security when it comes to immigration, the vetting I'm referring to is not you have this national identity, you're from this nation, so you're automatically not allowed. What I'm
That's what
talking about
happens,
is
though.
like what I'm talking about is on an individual basis, making sure that the values are compatible, that we don't have like crazy like jihadis coming in. I have like I'm talking on like Discord in an online sense. I have friends all over the world. Like I have friends in the Middle East and South Asia, and I would be fine if they were like able to come here. Like I don't. It's not about like you're an individual from a nation, so you're automatically like bad and not allowed. But at the same time, they tell me how much they struggle being in those societies, having those values unfortunately normalized and reinforced by their communities. It's like on one hand, I would love for like them to be able to come here, but on the other hand, like but this is what they tell me in their experience. There's a lot of people in their own communities and their own families who do have a very like backwards kind of like mindset, so to speak. And to those people, I would not want them here. Like you understand what I'm saying? It's not about like everyone
Well, sure,
from a
but
nation.
we've not got okay. But even if you sure, but we haven't got the right to say, well, no, you can't enter the United Kingdom. Like it's not like they're trying to enter your personal like abode or your house, right? Like it's the we can't just you can't just block someone from going to the entire nation based on you not liking some views they have, right? If they start acting on stuff, then yeah, there's a response that has to happen. But that response is the same for like anyone in the country. Like in the same way that we can't just like stop someone being able to move from A to B within the country. The same should apply outside the country because, as we've already said, it doesn't matter what nation you're from if you hold those conservative values. Those people that you're friends with. And I've got international friends as well, right? Like it's the conservative values in their country, which we know because, as you've just said yourself, you're friends with people from these countries. It's not as though there's like an inherent national thing. So it's frustrating, I think, when we can identify that there are social structures in place, like Taliban, for instance, are teaching a horrible right-wing conservative, ideology. That's the thing we should be targeting, not the fact that they are from Afghanistan. And the way we do that isn't through just saying, no one from Afghanistan can enter our, can come in. We've got to vet you all. We're not gonna, we'll send our because for as much as you're saying, well, I don't want it to be like, stopping the good people coming in. The people who make those laws don't care that they have a racial nativist perspective. They've got a far right perspective. They just want their homogenous white European nation state or whatever, right?
Right, and
like,
we can say that that's like extreme, but I feel like you're just on the other extreme where it's like we'll just have no borders at all, no security, no vetting. Like,
but I
do
don't
you
agree
understand
with
how
that premise. I don't agree with that premise.
but you agree?
Why
But
security?
can you see that?
I don't see
Okay,
what you keep saying security when I've said several times the security is threatened by things, climate change, corporate dominance, threats to regulations and the food and stuff we eat, the fact that we're
and
plunging
external threats. It's all
yeah
of
external
those.
threats on.
Yeah, like I don't wait,
I'm
but
not
you're
threatened
saying
by
like
immigrants. I'm not threatened by immigrants no more than I am any other person in the country.
and
I'm
again, I'm
threatened
not
by
saying
I'm threatened by the guy from like I'm from London. I was born in London. I'm threatened by like when the far right march around and smash up like the local mosque or whatever and bus stops and all the other stuff. But that friends me, not like random some guy from I don't know what Turkey or something like who just happened Ahmed from Turkey. Like, who cares? That's just one person. Like, if they have conservative views, then that's the conservative issue that, I have an issue with their conservatism. I don't care that they're from Turkey because they could also be from Britain and have conservative views. Like, ultimately, there's no issue, really.
I guess I'll present a sort of hypothetical. So if we have a nation in which the values and the ideals are oriented towards like freedom, free expression, individualism, like being against things like forcing women to wear burqas or like throwing gay people off rooftops. Like let's say like that like nation exists, they have those values. Um, do you not think it would be somewhat dangerous if they had no means of controlling or perhaps like vetting the amount of people outside of that socialization? Because the problem is if there's literally no like vetting or security at all, what is to stop like a massive amount of people externally who have completely incompatible values from
How,
coming in. Like I don't even
values aren't
understand. Like
fixed either. Like you can learn different things, and also like it's if you so you've got this great society, right? Like people come in and you can share your values and say, hey, we are a democracy. We like having rights and everyone's welcome and such. Like it's not gonna just suddenly like fall apart because hundred other people showed up, right? Like, and there's nothing to say that those people can't also share and indulge in the niceness of their society, right? Like, if the issue is, and there's always been the issue in these sort of conversations, the immigrants ultimately are different and blocked from doing all the same, participating in the same national culture. That leads to the isolation, which allows conservative manipulators to come in and say, hey, our way of life has to be kept separate from the West, which then allows them to sustain patriarchal ideas or anti-LGBTQ ideas, which then gets reinforced back at home, and the cycle continues. And then that leads to people like yourself saying, well, they're incompatible, they can't, we've got to be wary of opening our borders and such. Like, the intervention then shouldn't be on this national identity, this different culture. It should be on said conservative groups, which clearly are manipulating the situation. The bad faith actor that says, well, we're fundamentally different, therefore we must keep our traditions that will benefit these hierarchies and institutions.
again, I still am not grasping the logic from within our like societies. There are like these very bad like conservative type of people, but then we shouldn't like also make sure that those types of people don't come from outside of our society, which would increase the number of those people in the first place. Like,
They aren't.
wait, but what I'm trying to say
you can
is
change
like,
your
wait,
values.
but
Like,
what I'm trying to say is like, why is there an either or? Why is it that I'm calling out, like, letting in people who have very backwards values, and you're saying, oh, but like we have people within the nation? It's like, sure, like, but the point is like we also have to like protect ourselves externally from that as
but
well,
that isn't
right?
protection. That's not protection, though, is it? Because like
So
the
it's not
person.
wait. So it's
Okay,
not protection to
the
like vet
person
people
coming.
and make
Like,
sure that they don't have crazy values.
well, not in the way you're suggesting. No, like if someone you can change your values, they're not like a fixed part of you, right? So someone that comes from a someone that has been raised to have really like patriarchal views, they aren't like determined to have that forever. Chances are, as you've said, like they've grown up in a society that has enforced it at gunpoint, right? So they come to like a Western nation, global North nation, and they spend time in a society that actually does have a more progressive state of things, and then because if they're able to participate fairly, there's a good chance I think, hey, actually, because I'm now just doing this every day, it's not so bad. I'm not like going about my life like being terrible. I'm now in that place. Also, it doesn't matter anyway. We can't, we don't, fundamentally agree with the idea that there should be this massive amount of power handed to the state, which means handing it to those with capital, i.e., the mega wealthy corporations and such. It isn't you that's being protected when when the US says we're gonna give $1 billion to ICE or whatever. It's ultimately the wealthy corporations that have diverted problems of the clear fundamental failings of society at the moment under capitalism away from corporate power, climate change, and such to the scary immigrants. Like fundamentally, that's all that's happening when we go down this path. And so even if you had, I don't know, some guy that is just like, yeah, I'm a staunch bigot, I don't care about any progressive stuff, I'm going to just come in and be an absolute pain. Like, that still isn't reason to say, well, this person's nationality has to be now monitored to because there's a chance this nation is now like this. Like, that person can just as easily exist in any nation because conservatism isn't something which is fixed to a nation. But I feel
Right,
like
the
we're
proportion of those people do
not
differentiate between
inherently because of the
societies.
nation, because of the places that are more conservative, and that can be undone through stuff. It's not something that is fixed, which is the point, and it doesn't matter anyway because we can't like a state should not have the power to curb the freedom of movement of people, and the people we want to have movement, like being wary of and such, aren't determined by their nation. It's by ideology and conservatism and such, which is true anywhere. And crucially, these mechanisms that we give states aren't used to do as we've discussed here of like producing happy communities. They're used to just police anyone that doesn't fit the racial profile that is desired, and then curb personal freedoms and civilian ability to participate properly.
Again, but so yes, theoretically anyone can like change their mind and learn stuff. I get it. But I mean
Absolutely.
it's not a guarantee. I mean, there are going to be people who even when
Uh,
presented with evidence don't change their views. And it's
okay, but
like
it's not the guarantee
why?
the other way, is
But
it?
it's like but why even risk it? Like why allow like people who would
It's
have like
not a.
backwards values
You
in
don't
your
know if they have
society?
backwards values, and who's to say they could. We got backwards society values right here. America puts people to death for stuff they then later find out is they're not innocent of. In Britain, we our waterway. There's a recent study. None of our waterways have, they're below the threshold for a safe level to drink from. That's a bad value. Destroying the land. That's not making me safe. That's risking my health. Where's the outrage for that? Like, there's all sorts of problems in the world, and of course, there's people from other countries which have terrible attitudes to life. They also exist in our country. So focusing on the national identity of said people is 100% the wrong way to go. And the proportion question is silly too, because they're not like a fixed quantitative stat you can measure. They're just things that you think people might believe because of the people in charge of their country. Same as in this country. If the state you live in America was the next election was won by a deeply conservative Republican that just like tore up all the civil liberties, and then you moved away, and someone said, "Oh well, you're from this state, so I'm afraid you can't come in. We're not happy with your presence here." Would that be and then ICE come and throw you in a car and drive you off? Like, was that something that you think would be a fair thing to do just because someone in the state you're moving to said, "Well, this makes me feel safer"?
I mean, I don't know how many times I need to clarify that I don't think every individual, no matter what, from a nation is automatically bad. And I
But
don't
that's the
think
consequence of this
just
direction.
being right, but a consequence of your direction is when a bunch of people who have horrible backwards values enter society and can make it worse and cause cultural clash. Like there's
Okay, but we're
I
not
understand that
just
but I understand like what I'm saying can be taken too far, but like
is
don't you
taken
think what
too
you're
far now.
okay, but don't you think what you're saying, like a not even like a more lax immigration system, you're straight up saying like abolish borders, abolish all of that. Don't you think that that's
Yeah,
also
a
pretty
lot. I
extreme? Can
mean,
have a bunch of negative consequences.
like abolish borders would be alongside the end of other oppressive structures and systems. Like we spoke quite a bit about wealth redistribution. We spoke about the corporate dominance and stuff. Like obviously, we're not just saying everyone move here and just leave it to the corporations and stuff to decide that. Obviously, it's coming with other stuff. Like of course it is. That
Right,
doesn't
and
change.
in the
That
same
doesn't
manner,
change
whenever
that the borders itself are also one of the oppressive structures that need to be critiqued, and ultimately, in a fair society, shouldn't be something that exists. Why should a state say, "Well, no, you are of this place, therefore you're not coming in"? It's not okay.
I mean, again, that's not necessarily what I personally believe, but I think that the state, or it doesn't even have to be like a state, but just like some form of like vetting people coming in externally. I think we should make sure that if someone comes in, that they don't have like a value system or a belief um, that is in direct conflict against the society in which they're trying to come into. Like that just seems like basic logic and
But
practicality
it
to
is
me.
not your right though to determine where someone else can and can't live. Like it's not. Yeah, it's not like I say. It's not as like you're letting in a new tenant or something, and someone's gonna put like live next door to like someone's gonna live in that room behind you, and they're like, you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, who is this person that's showing up? Like it's someone probably you're never even gonna meet living anywhere in like a huge country, like and that is just the truth. Like you could just as easily have someone move from I don't know where you are in America, but like they could move from Jackson, Mississippi, LA, and have LA, California, Seattle, anywhere in the country, could someone can move and have exactly the same negative views, and you're not going to deport them or say, well, you're of a different culture, because they might turn around and say, well, I'm American as well. This direction of thought doesn't end in positive places. It ends in atrocity and death. And for as much as you're saying, oh well, if you open the borders, bad people will come. Like That's true of anything. Like, people, bad things happen anyway. The idea that, oh well, externally there's more, ignores any of
Hmm.
the wider social critique and focuses on the national question, which we're rejecting as something which isn't like a deciding factor. Anyway, before this stream goes around in a cycle, we did have identity politics in big air quotes was one of the other things, but you can sort of lead into in a moment. But I know you wanted to say a bit more on this, so
Yeah, no, you're good. I don't know. The more I'm listening to you, the more I feel like your kind of vision of like free association, anyone can go anywhere, oh, no borders. I think the only way that that could ever work is if every society is like generally developed, and if we don't see societies where there's like backwards, barbaric customs and traditions normalized. But until then, there's always going to have to be some necessity
but
for
barbaric
external
is
protection. I mean,
subjective. Barbaric is subjective. The death penalty is barbaric. Happens in loads of Western nations. Poverty is barbaric. Happens in lots of Western nations. Climate change is barbaric, perpetuated by mainly Western nations and other developed ones in Asia, I suppose, as well. But America and such. It's all subjective. It depends on your viewpoint. There's anything you can say is backwards and horrible and such, but it's not
okay, so
strictly
you're saying that we can't in any reasonable way just say right here that modern day Afghani society, we can say that it's better or worse in any way than any other society. Like, what do you mean it's all subjective? I mean, don't you think there are like genuinely harmful and bad values that exist and are
absolutely. Of course,
normalized?
there's
You're right. So it's not. So is it?
the
So it's not
conservative.
subjective.
It still is right because it's not like sure Afghanistan has the Taliban, terrible, clearly conservative and horrible and such. That doesn't mean that their culture is inherently a certain way. That's a conservative group that has taken over there, in large part because of the long history of colonialism and intervention in Afghanistan, by the way. So again, caused by indirectly the actions of other nations, but it's not like a binary scale where it's like good and bad and it's just a slider. There are things which are worse in other nations. There are also things which are worse in our nations. Like we have problems in our nations, and people believe in the same thing, just maybe in different ways of expressing it. Like, and we therefore can't just be saying, "Oh, well, their culture's bad, and we can't let them in," when other stuff is other stuff even is like happening and such. Like
Again,
it's
the barbaric values that I'm talking about, again, I've clarified this many times. I don't think it's like permanent or fixed or inherent and that it's always going to be that way no matter what. I really hope that these societies develop and get rid of those kinds of barbaric values. But it's just like this whole like, oh, it's all subjective. Like, we do bad things too. I feel like once you get into that mindset, I mean, again,
okay,
like,
but you're
dude,
you're
like
in that mind. Like
we can clearly
but can
see
we clearly
like,
see? You don't
okay,
care
so
that
you're saying that
like
you can't. Okay, so we're
but
looking
you but
at
okay, but
modern day
like
Afghanistan, and you're saying that we can't say in any way that it's like a bad society overall. That doesn't mean that there aren't any bad things that happen in other societies, but like right here, right now, because of the Taliban, because of their socialization, it is a bad society. It's not inherent, it's not
okay,
fixed, it can
yeah,
develop, it
yeah.
can change. But right here, right now, it's clearly a bad society. Saying like,
Everything you
oh,
just
everything's
said is also
subjective,
true
like
of everything you just said is also true of the GOP in America, and maybe it's not to the same degree, but it's still the
definitely
same
not the same
social problem.
degree.
Well, I mean, it is if you get shot dead by an ICE agent and then you're just dead. Same thing, you're not going to notice the difference if you're in the crosshair of it. If you're put to death, if you're incarcerated, like it's not exactly having a cheery time, right? So I don't think you can just say blanketly, oh yes, there's a hierarchy of civilizations, this place is barbaric and stuff, when clearly the connecting link is the conservative element, right? Like the
Right. And
elements
if you
that
think the conservative
that's the
element
thing.
is bad, then we can also see that that thing that you think is bad exists in a higher proportion in some societies than others. So, thus, overall, a
Yeah,
society
in
which
some
has a
societies
massive proportion of
like
those values that you
Texas,
dislike are overall bad societies.
in some
That's your own,
societies
that's
like
according to your own
in some
standards.
societies like Texas and Alabama and Mississippi, right?
Those places are still nothing compared to Afghanistan, not even
Unless you're the
close.
person at the other end of the bullet or in the prison, right? I mean,
Bad things happen, but again, the
yeah, but so
proportionality is
there we
not
go.
even close.
There we go.
Not even close.
Well, unless you're the person at the other end of it. Like, that's the point. You know, if we don't address the conservative elements of it, there's no reason to say the same things happening that we're saying, oh yeah, it's barbaric and evil and whatever in Afghanistan can happen in, you know, supposedly modern, civilized societies. There is no national divider here, is the point. The concern you've got over external threats should be just as applied to the internal threat of conservatives and of like 1,000 people moving from some KKK charter town in the deep south to your town is all the same threats you listed earlier, right? But
wait, so you can admit that people can be a threat if they enter a community and have horrible values. So why do you not apply that logic to secure borders?
So you're not listening to what I'm saying.
But you just said the same thing.
You know, you're not listening to what I'm saying though. Like it in the same stance would pose all the same questions, but one doesn't get the attention as the other because one isn't given the racial lens, the national lens. One is, oh, it's Americans moving from one place to another. It's just people moving around. The other is, oh, it's immigration. Even though both are examples of immigration, only the people from other countries, and usually global south countries, get the stigma and the lens of critique. Ultimately, we reject the idea that this is a inherent thing. And even the stuff you were saying about high proportion and such, it doesn't even matter because the idea that we, can say, oh, we the nation stop you from coming in, getting vetted or whatever. Like, no, because you aren't, your community is not the whole state of America, it's your street or something. And even then, to be honest, right? Ultimately, these things are arbitrary dividers. The issue is their conservative ideology, not the national identity. They shouldn't be, unless you're going to isolate out some conservative thing, in which case turn yourself inwards and have a look at the state of Western countries right now, right? Anyhow, before my laptop explodes from the heat, you wanted to identity politics. One of the other.
But I don't know how much time I want to take just to be mindful of you, because what is it, 11 p.m?
It's 11 o'clock. Yeah, I've got a bit more time. The 2-hour mark sort of might be a cut-off point, to really sort of go for. But no, we're fine for now.
Okay, but I guess one last point before we move on. The way we are to deal with radical, I guess, religious fundamentalism within our own societies, that's a lot more in depth. You're gonna have to, think more structurally, think more systemically.
Education.
Go into exactly. But the way you stop radical crazy, but the way you stop radical crazy fundamentals from coming into your country from abroad is literally just to at the border have vetting and security and be like, no, you can't come in. Comparing that to how much harder it is to solve those problems within your society, that's why I feel like you're making either or.
But for every,
the way we tackle extremism within a society is going to have to be in-depth, going to have to be structural. But, that's one thing. Why would we just want, why would we not care if a bunch of people externally would come in?
But it's such a waste of money.
Won't they make it a million?
It's such a waste. Harder? For every one radical fundamentalist that is supposedly showing up and being stopped and caught at the borders or whatever, there's 1,000 more people who don't have those views that are getting stopped, 1 million more who can't come in because of that. The fundamental systemic issues aren't being addressed. The education you could be spending money on to actually bring people together, the communities stuff you could be spending in.
I guess how would you try to temper
it's a silly thing to focus on. Sorry?
I guess how would you try to temper it? Because if I'm just thinking, so let's say
I've already said I don't think the problem is with immigrants. It's with people. The conservative thing.
So I'm saying so let's say we do have open borders and millions of people, come in from all around the world. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be an extremist. If you just have a large amount of people coming in who are socialized very differently, so they, speak a different language, they have some different beliefs. So how would you try to temper that so that society doesn't just fracture and fall apart because you have so many different kinds of people in such rapid succession all just coming with each other? Do you think there should be some common common identity or some sense okay, we should assimilate to something that's fair to all of us? do you think that it should at least be tempered? Because if not, then I think that is just kind of delusional.
I don't think it's delusional as well. I mean, I think that if you have a society that has resources in place and is able to actually support people and not austerity laden dumps which bin off all the public programs and let corporations run wild, then you wouldn't even be seeing half the concerns people falsely attribute to immigrants and such. But again, the same thing applies, right? Like ultimately, even if we wanted to claim they were all gonna not assimilate, which is such a horrible word, by the way, they aren't. Who is it? Who is anyone to say? Well, they can't move to.
Wait, sorry. How is it a horrible word?
Sorry, because it's like something a cyborg says. Assimilate, like it's inorganic parts that have been assimilated into the machine or whatever. Like people are people. Anyhow, it isn't the problem you're describing it as. If Western nations hadn't destroyed their own infrastructure for austerity and handed stuff over to corporations, things like schools and hospitals and housing wouldn't be under the pressure they are now, which then wouldn't make it so easy for right-wing media to scapegoat immigrants and drum up every single incident that happens into some national crisis whilst ignoring all the other ones that are happening. So no, it's ultimately, if you are so concerned about culture being eroded and stuff, and the bad ideas taking root, look at the conservative right-wing ideas are the issue, and they are found the world over, and the societies that have them more are not because of their, ultimately, like they aren't inherent things inside us. They're learned. They learned things. Anyhow, you had identity politics. I mean, that's such a nebulous term, right? But I'm sure you've got a perspective on it. We put it in the title, so we should go over it a little bit.
Okay. So to clarify, I know in the YouTube video you had one quote that I said in like the Discord channel. It was like, was the left like seriously effed up with identity politics in the 2010s? So to clarify, so I'll clarify what I mean. Listen, on one hand, I get it. America, we have certain history. We had slavery, we had stuff. So obviously, I'm not saying like we're going to pretend that none of these things exist, that there weren't historical things that were done. But my problem in the 2010s, or rather mid 2010s specifically, is that I feel like, are you familiar with the term like woke 1.0? And I know like talking about wokeness is kind of cringe, but I'm just wondering, woke 1.0, if you're
I've heard it a few times in the last few days. I obviously know the actual history of the term woke, but yeah, no, I'm familiar with woke and what it means and stuff.
I've even within left-wing spaces, people are starting to talk about woke 1.0. You had AOC saying, yeah, woke 1.0 was crazy, we went too far, etc. So with how I would define it, I'm not going to use the historical definition of woke because clearly people don't care about that.
Some people do care, and there's a reason it should be brought up.
It's a matter of connotation. So I know like the term woke had its historical definition, mostly pertaining, I think, with like, sort of like kind of black nationalist movements.
Not black national, not necessarily nationalist, but you're awake to racial injustice. You're a black person that can see that the reason your life is tricky is not because you're a failure, it's because of systemic racism. You're awake, therefore you are woke, like an adjective, you're woke. And then as it got popularized in the social media means that this language is then brought online and people can see it from all sorts of communities, not just like majority black ones, African American ones and such. It then gets commodified a bit, used sort of fairly all over the place, and then right-wing people start turning it into an insult. Oh, this is woke, this is a woke infection, this is a woke thing. And obviously now it's sort of like turned into this bungled, like derogatory thing, even though the original meaning, and to be honest, the meaning still now, like the things it's describing are good things, right? Being aware of social injustice and such.
Yeah, so the only reason I said the definition doesn't matter as much So the reason I said that was, I think, is you actually pointed out, because I was going to make a similar point. Like, the term itself seems to have taken a different connotation and been tied more with social media and online discourse in the mid 2010s onward. So when I say like identity politics, I'm referring to that era. Like, I'm referring to like online mid 2010s, that sort of shtick. Um, so I think a huge problem with like the 2010s like identity politics, so to speak, is it felt like a it really felt like a almost like abandonment of like these unifying bread and butter economic issues. You look at the early 2010s with the Occupy Wall Street movement. We are the 99%. Like, it was against billionaires, like bankers, Wall Street. It was a clear like economic elite. And what I think unfortunately happened is some strands of the left completely embraced identity politics, and I feel like they just didn't focus on economics and became this very divisive sort of like, instead of talking about like actual economic elites like billionaires, Wall Street corporations, it became about like whiteness and like white this, white that. And I feel like the blanket racialization of power was a huge mistake, because these conversations were also happening during a time where white working class people, specifically in Appalachia, you know, they had their jobs offshored in the 90s. So a lot of these communities, they had their factories destroyed. I mean, these communities were ruined. They were impoverished. And then, they're looking online and they're looking at all these left wing spaces talking about white privilege, white this, white that. And I'm not really surprised that the reaction to that was like, wow, I guess this whole leftism thing is just about being against me. And,
I
there's
mean,
people.
sorry, you go finish your sentence.
Very good. Yeah, and I feel like, you know, a reaction to that is why I feel like a lot of people pendulum swung to the right after that 2010s like identity politics focus era. I mean, again, like, you also had Coca-Cola literally like have like a seminar like saying like how like try to be less white and stuff like that. It's just something about the fact that even like multinational corporations, they co-opted this like left-wing identity politics language, and something about that tells me that left-wing like identity politics just itself, without the economic stuff, is not actually a serious structural threat to the billionaires or to the corporations, which is precisely why they were able to co-opt it. Fucking JP Morgan doing like pride parades and stuff. That is what I'm critiquing. Identity politics for the sake of identity politics, focusing on division and us versus them narratives of power, rather than unifying we are the 99%, the enemy is the billionaires, the corporations, things like that. And I think
Right.
that way of thinking was significantly more prevalent within online left-wing thought during that period of time. And I think that is a contributing factor to the sort of like right-wing pendulum swing or backlash that we see now in the 2020s. And I think that was a huge mistake within the left.
Okay. In a politest possible way, I think that essentially all of that was. I take about 8 or 9 issues with all stuff you just said, Ben. So where to even start, right? Like, I mean, there's plenty of stuff to go off there, but let's just start with 2010s. You say people, there's Occupy and stuff, and there's
Early 2010s, like more so.
right. Someone, like, you say online spaces. I mean, for a start, like 100% stuff about like worker rights and economic inequality was definitely being spoken about, right? Secondly, could you give like an example of the someone criticizing whiteness and whatever, like white privilege and things like that, right?
An example of someone criticizing white privilege.
So like, no, as in like when you say, oh, they were talking about identity and they're talking about whiteness, like what is that like someone like making a video like talking about like white privilege would be like an example.
Yeah, no. So for example, you have authors like Robin DiAngelo, for example, would talk about abolishing whiteness. As I mentioned with Coca-Cola, like we literally had a major corporation having a seminar saying try to be less white. And what I gauge from that is um my concern is the, as I said before, the racialization of like what are power structures that don't actually care about that. Like when
Do
for
you
example, like in Appalachia, whenever majority white working class people, whenever their jobs were offshore, they had their communities ruined. Like I don't, it doesn't appear to me that like the billionaires and like the multinational corporations are thinking like, oh, we're like pro white and we want to like treat white people better. It seems like they just
okay?
don't, it seems like they want to, it seems like they're against like working class people in general, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're
Okay, I
brown.
think you might
And
have
it's like, what's the point
misunderstood
of
the. I mean, I think you might like white. Okay, the fact that someone makes a video about the history of what whiteness is, right? Like the invention of white as a racial category to then create the other, to create the denigrated status of black people, chattel slavery, the stuff we were talking about earlier with the civilized Western world versus the non-civilized black continent, all of that sort of stuff. That is what if that's being spoken about in a video, and that's being connected to today, where like you can look at many of the ways systemic racism still exists and stuff. How is that something which is to blame or to take issue with people who like are also having their issues spoken about? Because it's not as though there were no videos or anything speaking about the plight of the working class, which are also the same people that are involved in other things, right? Because we're intersectional, we can see that. Like, I hate the phrase "white working class" because it's not like we're not it's the working class. It's not like a set divide, right? Appalachia is not like a white ethno state. There's people of all different backgrounds, and the idea that someone making a video about white privilege and the systemic racism of society is somehow to blame for the right upswing, which is it's also nebulous as well, right? Like, I don't accept that as a premise. I also don't accept that the actions of Coca-Cola or JP Morgan are somehow anything to do with the left. That's what would you call it? Liberal pinkwashing or liberal feminism or liberal whatever. The idea that a corporation is taking the optics of something and marketing it. That's just capitalism. That's not anything to do with the left. So I think
yeah, but that was to demonstrate my point that the strands, I'm not saying all leftists, but the strands of the left that specifically prioritize, in my opinion, divisive identity politics. The reason I mentioned JP Morgan and Chase or like whatever other company, I was trying to demonstrate that these structures of power were able to utilize and co-opt that language, and it shows me that
they do that anyway.
You don't no, but
like
they did it with identity
anyway.
politics. But okay, but they did it with identity politics. But you won't see them doing it with like economic policies. Like you're not going to see like JP Morgan and Chase being like tax the rich, but you will see them like talking about like white privilege and like things like that. I think again, this isn't like the left is blanketly this way or anything, but it's more of a demonstration to show that this didn't actually like challenge any like structures or power, because the said structures, the said power were co-opting that language. Like these people, corporations clearly felt comfortable enough to talk about things like white privilege, but they'll never say stuff like tax the rich.
Like using it as a quick slogan, and they also corporations also speak about like making things right and fixing climate change and helping the little man and representing the voice of the people. And it's obviously like just something they're saying to get quick money. That's what they've always done. So the idea that you can just focus on it when they speak about things which are also, like, by the way, maybe part of the reason that there's a cultural backlash to when people speak about, I don't know, feminism or anti-racism, whatever, is because there's still issues in society, right? Like it's not as though we're living in a neutral state where everyone is just like completely absolved of all existing prejudices. Unfortunately, a lot of people still find it hard to recognize that systems of oppression still apply today because it implies that society is not all right. I don't know. I also, by the way, reject the idea that somehow there's just an inherent shift right. I mean, the right have definitely got more far right, and there's definitely been conservative political gains in the sense that they've seized power. But I don't think if you actually look at I don't know, like election numbers or the wider populace, it's very much not quite cultural dominance. It's just like they've gained more political power. It's not as though there's an overriding oh yes, everyone's conservative now. We've just firmly rejected all the social progress we've made. This is just where it is now. It's the conservative movement has been dragged to the far right, and said far rights have got enough votes in flawed and bad elections to enact their view of the world more than they did previously. And crucially, how is this? How is talking about actual issues something that that should be, oh, we shouldn't do this because it's divisive? If we'd had YouTube and social media and stuff 50, 100 years ago, the same thing would be said. You'd be they've always created oh yes, this is a divisive thing to do, this is negative, you shouldn't be talking about this, because of course they would, because when you talk about social inequalities based on race and gender and sexuality and stuff, that challenges a power structure, that challenges a hierarchy. And so those that exist with said power, conservative forces and such, of course they're gonna set up stuff to go against it. I don't think it's I don't think that's an accurate depiction of events, or one that particularly represents things very well at all.
Yeah, so a couple things. The right wing pendulum swing I'm talking about, I never said it's inherent. Again, things are fluid. I get it. Maybe in 10 years it will generally pendulum swing to the left. But again, I don't mean it's inherent, it's literally everyone or it's always going to be this way. But I've been online a long time. I can see there's a general higher dominance of kind of right wing stuff now compared to 2014, 2015. So again, I'm not saying literal inherent it's everything, but I feel it's fair to say there's a general shift towards the right online and in discourse
We're in
on
late stage
social media,
capitalism,
for
aren't we?
example.
We're in late stage. The liberal capitalist society we live in is facing its latest crisis because capitalism is not a sustainable system, and in that point of crisis, the capitalist class turns to fascism, and that in the digital age is going to take the form of thousands of media outlets spewing out stuff against woke or identity politics or what was it, critical race theory or any other dog whistle or buzzword or whatever. It's just what happens in a society where there's massive wealth inequality and they want to protect said inequalities because it maintains their power. We just happen to be living through this one live, so it's because it's not. It's also I don't think, for as much as of course it's. I agree with the idea that we need to tie in, we need to be intersectional and tie in economic with social. These two, socioeconomic. These two things are linked anyway, right? They're connected. But some a feminist that's liberal saying, oh, there's workplace inequality. That isn't a bad thing. That is true. That isn't something that has just been made up. That is something that's an actual issue. And
yeah, but that's
of course,
that's a very reasonable take. Saying hey, there's sexism, there's misogyny, and then you have the whole BuzzFeed era, for example, where it's just oh men spreading and all this crazy stuff that was online, and unfortunately,
who cares? Why?
No,
okay,
but
but
it's
even
not,
if you,
I know
even
you
if
don't
you
care,
think,
but what I'm trying to say is that the perception, the optics of the left for people who are outside of it during that time online, unfortunately, a lot of it was that kind of stuff. That's
okay, but
the
listen back
perception
to
that a lot
this,
of people
though.
had on the left.
But just listen to yourself, though, right? I one BuzzFeed video made me feel a bit annoyed, so I now gave up all my positions and became a
It's
no,
not
seriously,
literally.
you can't.
I'm not
No,
literally.
but,
Dude, you have to know I'm not literally saying one BuzzFeed video. I'm bringing that up as an example. I'm trying to
no,
say that among many, the perception of the left online during that time was unfortunately that it was pure divisive, like identity focused stuff, not really anything unifying based off of like working class issues. It was more about denigrating groups like men, for example, over like
Yeah, a
billionaires.
bad faith interpretation that no one actually like. Obviously,
Dude,
listen
it's
to
just
about
it's
five
not the thing is
seconds.
I've literally talked with other like lefties about this who agree like yeah, there were parts online like a lot of that stuff was too far with just identity politics. Like
Based
this
on what,
just
like
like what I'm
what was
saying
too
isn't
far? What was too far then? Like, what was too far?
dude, again, like the strands of the left I'm talking about were purely focused on identity politics. They were literally just straight up saying like, yeah, like men are bad, like white people are bad, things
Oh,
like
come
that.
on!
Like it just
What?
tied into that.
No. Okay, he was actually saying that though, seriously, in earnest, as their entire position. Like outside that sounds like what every reactionary rubbish video was saying. It was like, oh, the left is saying this. Who was actually saying that, and
No, no,
that was
no.
their only thing.
When I say the left, I don't literally mean everyone, but it's just if you are going to see people who are just straight up like hate white people, it's going to be in certain left wing spaces. In the same way, if you're going to see people who hate brown people, it's probably going to be in right wing
That isn't no.
spaces.
It's a bad
Like
faith argument, man.
no,
Like it's obviously
it's a factual observation.
it's
Like
not like some that is
so
like
you're
so
just
someone has
denying.
made a
So you're just denying that doesn't exist. There aren't like there are
I,
genuine
I was
like
alive in 2015. I remember like the sort of videos you're describing. You'd get response videos where some guys like saying, "Oh, this creator hates white people." They're saying that everyone is evil, and like you watch the original video, it's like obviously a critique of systemic racism, or someone saying, "Oh yes, people have biases that they've grown up with and stuff." Like it's something that obviously isn't the hyperbolic, like ridiculous non sequitur that's been brought up. And by the way, even if that were true, right? Even if you saw like the BuzzFeed video or someone just tweet out like, yeah, men need to grow up or whatever. Like, how is that like leading to oh well, I'm gonna now ignore all the stuff that is still talking about my issues and it's still like affecting me anyway, right? And just go over to the GOP. Like it's so obviously a bad faith, wrong argument that is co-opted by people who intentionally want that to be the case, right? Like they right wing provocateurs and content creators and media and capital and stuff. They want that to be the narrative because that subtly says stop being left wing, stop making any critiques of serious nature about the way the world is, and yeah, in turn that then takes the pressure off them in times of crisis, as we're in now, capitalist crisis. We should be absolutely talking about economics, but that is tethered to all the stuff. There's no the palette of the left is one that has many intersectional nodes, and you don't achieve anything by saying, oh well, this era where I felt like it was too identity based, which is nonsense because it's all identity, right? Like there's no such thing as non-identity politics, right? Like we're all connected in a social world that has these. Like we can't not choose to have things that we're labelled, right? It's just inherent to this society right now. We have to deconstruct it, and I would love to live in a world where we could just focus on this is economic status, but that isn't how things have happened. We live in a world where there's been these marginalizations based on all the stuff we've said earlier. So we have to identify it across different lenses. And yeah, it's going to make us uncomfortable sometimes. Like I remember, what was it? I read once, it was a list of words which are ableist, like words with ableist origins, right? And you're reading words, and obviously like the arselism there, right? But you read words like stupid and moron and idiot, and you're thinking, oh well, I use these sometimes. But then you think, actually, hang on a second. When you think about it, a lot of these do have medical histories, and it is better to wean these out of our language because they do have an element of saying problematic stuff. And ultimately, it makes us think a little bit, and it might make us feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes. But we're adults, and we can actually think, okay, let's let's not let ourselves be just outraged and then fall into some pit of like right wing garbage. We can talk about it and work together, and as a community think, okay, yeah, let's incorporate this, and we'll have more people that we can work with then because we're including more people. And not to belabor this point, but it's connected anyway. If you're talking about like I think the idea that the white working class in Appalachia, were put off the left by some videos online, like ignores things like the Democrat Party not being left wing whatsoever, and instead, just happy to continue the neoliberal status quo. The lack of resources, to be a community. The fact that we've not got community spaces in lots of deprived areas, so they end up isolated online. The algorithms are online are tailored to benefit. Like look at what happens on Twitter, right? It's bought by a billionaire, and now it's just right wing slop, right? So there's so many systemic things we can point to beyond just some videos got released and that has put off people and ruined the left or whatever. Like it's just such a bad analysis. Like, I'm sorry I'm not going to mince my words. It's not that isn't something I think is particularly cogent.
Again, like I understand what you're saying because from your perspective, and you're also like within the left spaces itself. So I'm sure you thought of it differently at the time, but I was outside of left wing spaces. So, we would just see a bunch of like, a bunch of like crazy takes and crazy people who clearly weren't interested in like genuine working class unity. They just wanted their own form of tribalism essentially. But
Can I ask how you knew that? How they wanted their own form of tribalism?
Because they would just explicitly say that they don't like entire groups of people. Like they would, like, dude, like, I don't even understand. Like, are you, like, do you not think that at least to some degree, like, that existed within left wing spaces, and perhaps they were like magnified online due to algorithms and whatnot? But again, that's like the problem is the perception, the optics of the left became a lot like that rather than these people just want to give us healthcare. They just want working class people to be united.
The
No, but I'm
optics
talking about
of
the optics in the.
the
I'm talking
optics
about
are
the optics
always
during
going
the
to
time.
the optics are always going to be easy to mock because your whole point is that you're criticizing power structures. Like you're always as a left wing person looking at society and saying, yeah, there's inequality and injustice here, and the status quo isn't okay. And because of that, that means you're going to be in the crosshairs. That means that people of the normative culture are going to say, yeah, this is a joke, and laugh and mock at you. Like, it's the hindsight of being able to say, yeah, look how amazing like these
Wait, real
previous
quick,
things were.
you saying normative reminds me of that like conversation you had, like at the end, dude.
Yeah, no, gosh, no, they even didn't start on that. But yeah, like you know what I mean, right? Like we can look back at all that's happened before us and pick out the bits that we like because we didn't live in it. If we had lived in previous times, that which seems normal now would have been alien. Like it's easy to say, oh well, the left needs to focus on this again so it doesn't get mocked, but they were mocked as well. Every left-wing person is going to face some derision and mockery, and the ones who, and it's also important to stress that the targets of this, like, left became cringe and bad optics or whatever, were always often marginalized people themselves, right? Like it's easy to say, oh, look at these weirdos doing this, and it's like all LGBTQ people, right? Because it's easy in society to pick on the differences and turn it into some. But like you're shaking your head, but it's true, right? Like you've got to see that.
I'm saying at the same time, you'll unfortunately see some more radical elements of like the activists, for example, saying stuff like misgendering is violence itself, or like
okay, but let's
or like a
that,
child,
like,
or like a trans child should be able to get like surgeries. Which I mean, to be fair, I don't like actually.
But like, okay, one of them.
To be fair, I don't care that much about the trans stuff,
but like both of those things,
you did see some like very radical stuff. From
okay,
activists.
But both of those things. I mean, for one, like yeah, sometimes justice will look radical. Secondly, both those things are things worth thinking about. Misgendering, like ultimately we take for granted. I'm assuming you're cisgender, right? Like you're, yeah. So we're both cisgender. Like no one's ever questioned, and forget question. Like, no one's ever questioned whether or not we're men or male. And no one's ever said, no, you can't do this, you can't have access to this because of your, because of being cisgender. Transgender people don't have that experience. and are not only losing access to stuff, but are having rights taken away, face social pressure, all of that stuff. So the the minute act of denying someone their identity by saying, no, I'm not going to refer to you as your actual identity, your pronouns, your name, whatever, I'm going to call you something different, carries a social weight. Like, if someone, I don't know, called you Tim or something, like, over and over again, you'd get annoyed, but it's not got social weight behind it. Like, you'd be annoyed at that person, maybe, and maybe you'd get cross and stuff, but it's not got as a social weight. But yeah, if you're a trans person and someone's calling you your dead name, that has the social power behind it. That's got the weight of a society that says, yeah, no, we don't recognize trans people. We're gonna, dehumanize you and take you out of society and stuff. And like in America now, where they're like stopping people from getting driving licenses and stuff and banning you from bathrooms, like that carries a social weight. So yeah, the reason that we say that is because the mind is part of our body, and the mind therefore can experience that pain, and that is violence therefore. And the other one, trans affirming care, like, ultimately is just same as any other healthcare, something that people need. Trans people need it. Like, all the nonsense about, oh yes, kids are being taken from schools, and it's just the same regurgitated gay panic and black panic and all the other like social scare stories. Like, it's the same thing happening over again, led by conservatives and the far right who want to see these groups dehumanized and have their power like taken away from them, so their status taken away. Like, so I think to an extent there's also an element of like, yeah, in society it's easy to make like social panics out of marginalized groups because of the marginalization that exists, right? Like, it's that's what happens in a world that has bigotry.
Again, like, I personally don't care that much about the trans stuff, but I mean, again though, like, there's still inevitably going to be some like very like radical elements within these like queer trans activists. And I just had another thought, like, some of these views are just not that popular overall, like with American people. And I guess my question to you is, if the goal is working class unity, like, to some degree, like, how much would you compromise on some like radical elements when it comes to that, if it will get more people on your side, and from that you can actually begin to like unify,
I mean, firstly,
and have
like,
solidarity.
popularity, like, you only have to look at, I mean, look at the history of anti-racism, right? Like, you don't have to you don't have to look far to find when like Martin Luther King was deeply unpopular, and then look at today. Like, there's no point chasing popularity again for the same reasons we were saying earlier, right? If you're challenging the status quo, then of course it's going to be hard to muster up immediate support and loyalty from people. But no, I don't think it's right to just compromise and stuff, because then when do you stop compromising? Like, you're always going, if you start saying, oh well, we can't push for these issues because not enough people are on board with these marginalized people yet. Like, what are you going to achieve? Because ultimately you need to have some like pushing against status quo, and being willing to take the heat, because people's lives are on the line. Like, I'm not gonna just abandon people because they don't get what it means to misgender someone, or they don't understand what a microaggression is. Like, ultimately, that is part. Like, if we're left wing, then what are we doing if we're not trying to do stuff? And yeah, sure. Like, obviously, I don't think anyone's saying like we're gonna just snap our fingers and every single inequality is going to be solved. But having justice will look radical in the face of fascism and capitalism and just any systemic structure, right? Like, so we can't we
Yeah,
can't
but
just say,
at
oh
the
well.
same time, like, no, what you said is fair. Like, you can't literally compromise on everything. I get it, but at the same time, like, if you don't compromise on anything and you just keep like purity spiraling, getting more
We've been
intense, like, no. But what I'm trying to say is, if you aren't careful, if you purity spiral too hard in a certain direction, I'm talking like in the long term, you can kind of screw your own goal of people, of like solidarity and working class unity, because you might purity spiral too much too quickly and just turn off a large portion of people. And if the other side is saying like, oh, look at these crazy lefties, I mean, if certain elements go too far, they're going to be used to affirm that narrative and to push people, I guess, in like right wing thought. um
But
so
that's
I guess
not.
like what you said is correct, but the concern also goes both ways.
No, but we've been compromising and not being radical for decades at this point, and look where we are, right? Like you only have to look at the like milk toast rubbishy Democrat Party. I mean, Labour in this country is not much better, right? But the idea that we gotta just we can't go too far, we can't be too radical, we gotta just like find a middle ground. Like it doesn't work because we're just seeing fascists win and undo the gains that were made. And look where we are. Like I also think as well, like it's not like it's all very well us. I mean, just on the you say you don't, you say you're not interested in the trans thing, but like you really should be because I feel like we, like injustice for one is for all, and I think if we start saying, well, people aren't as fussed about this, got to compromise, like it's just chunks get taken out of the movement that then we lose, and it's people, and crucially means we're losing allies in our fight against injustice, right? Like if we're just saying, no, we're not going to be that fussed about LGBTQ people because we've got to get on board, like that loses millions of people in the countries that we live in, right? Like, and crucially helps in the right-wing cause instead, like because that is part of the inequality and the hierarchy that maintains the system and such, right? Like it's not...
but wait, but at the same time, what I said, if you go too far the other way, doesn't that like I feel like that applies more in my scenario, because if you purity spiral too hard and get too radical, isn't that like...
Why do you say purity spiral? Like what do you mean purity spiral?
I just mean when people like obsess too much over like I'm talking like ideological purity, and if you disagree with like this one thing out of many, like we're just gonna like hate you and excise you.
I don't think that's I think
so. I'll give an example. I'll give an example of this. I was looking at like a forum, like a conversation, and it was actually about like racism and stuff, and it was like different groups of people were in this forum, and this one East Asian American was giving their experience with like racism and facing stuff, and then someone responded by saying like, oh well, like yeah, I know like you face racism, but you guys are like more white adjacent and I'm like more oppressed, so like it's not as bad. And it's just like, okay, like I feel like that's an example of purity spiraling, like where you're obsessing way too much over like, oh, I'm more oppressed than this other person, where you're getting to the point where you're actively like trying to downplay someone's experience with racism, for example. Like that's an example of purity spiraling, where I feel like you're just going way too far. Or like this post I saw where it was like, well, white non-binary people, like you're still white, so like it's like, okay, like I feel like that kind of stuff like is just too radical, like, and I feel like there's no real point in that specific way of thinking.
Okay,
and, like,
but like
uniting working class people. I mean, you can admit like with any ideology, people can go too far. Like you can admit that, like right? Anyone can go too far.
But in those scenarios, right, like a critical analysis of how different things intersect is good and healthy. The fact that sometimes people like bungle their words and do it in a maybe less than tactful way, that's not a failing of being critically analytical of society. That's like individual actors sometimes don't always make the best conversationalists, right? Like, it's like the same as imagine if like someone bumps into you like on the street or something, and you're like shouting and stuff. Like the fact they bumped into you wasn't okay, but if you're like yelling and screaming, like that might make the conversation less smooth and stuff, right? Like, it's the same thing. Like the fact that someone is not tactful in a conversation or doesn't have the causes a bit of a ripple effect. That doesn't change that it's still like useful sometimes to discuss the way say whiteness and being non-binary or transgender intersect, and the idea that there's different things at play. But crucially, if we want those conversations to be healthy and sensible, we've got to cut out the people saying like, we can't talk about this because it's divisive. You've gone too far, or any of the other stuff, right? Because that is what, if we never talk about it, then there's oppression and stuff continues. I also think as well that these conversations, like the idea that like ideological stuff is too pure or whatever, or too like fixated on, often like for as much as you have those examples, like oftentimes it's like someone has said something, got criticised for it, and like doubled down or said, "Oh, well, it's not my fault." It's like they've not taken the criticism, and then ended up like because they're unable to personally reflect, ended up like I don't know, making a like why I left the left or some like ridiculous like
Yeah,
melodramatic
so
stuff,
also
right?
to clarify, so I don't think we should like literally not allow anyone to ever talk about identity at all. My concern is, I guess, like a matter of primacy. It's like to make sure that like identity politics doesn't take a front seat while these unifying economic policies take a back seat. Like
But the
I just think
economic
to
policy
myself,
is
like,
the that is all identity. Like I mean, working class is an identity, right? I know it's like you know you can look at it economically, but it's tied into all of it. There's no one without the other. You can't have left wing politics without having the economic and the social and the socio-economic. Like it's all meshed together,
again, I never
right?
said we should. I never said we should like. I'm saying I never said we should ignore like ban or like abolish the identity part of it. I'm saying that we can't like say that the identity is more important than the economics. Um, it's sort of like think of it like this, like the fact that during like the early 2020s with like the BLM protests, like the George Floyd stuff, like it's kind of like, oh wow, like you can buy like BLM merch at Target. Wow, we're gonna pat ourselves on the back, but like you actually go into Black communities and there's still lots of like problems there.
That's
So that's what I
liberal.
mean.
That's liberal capitalism again. That's the commodification of anti-racism. That's
No,
not
but
anti-racism's
that
fault, though, right?
but that's what I'm trying to say. It's like this like abstract like identity politics stuff without the economics. So you're also critiquing that.
Well, sure, yeah, but that's not an issue with identity politics or what you're calling identity politics, which I would say is just left-wing politics. That's corporations co-opting stuff, which wouldn't be an issue if we were able to say, yeah, like if that issue is one of sort of a bit inevitable, right? Like in a society operated on capital, of course, a corporation has the ability to influence things more, right? Or not influence things more, but like has the ability to buy up advert space and influence a political party like the Democrats into I don't know, like doing some meaningless statement or something, and then not actually taking the steps. That isn't, I don't think, the same thing as like individual activists saying, "Yeah, we've got to critique white structures in society, whatever." Like it's different things. We are now, by the way, past the 2 hour mark.
Oh, sorry, I got. I just
No, no,
didn't
no, no. It's a
understand.
conversation. We've both been talking. It's not a one person thing.
Yeah, I
So
guess um, again to clarify, like that what I'm critiquing is when it's treated as like is when it takes the primary focus over economics. Where so for example, obviously like I have a certain identity, like my friend has a certain identity, like people have their different identities. There should be a space to discuss the reality of that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't let that take primacy over the economic like unifying stuff. I'm not saying it's not intertwined at all or it's not interconnected. It is. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like it should be against the billionaires first. Then it should be about being against like billionaires first, not against like whiteness first, if that makes sense.
I get what you're saying, but I disagree with the idea that you'd rank it because it is ultimately like it's happening at the same time, right? Like the wealth of the billionaire is created through not just the like worker billionaire worker capitalist relationship, but it's also like the global north, global south, female labor not being valued as much, LGBTQ people not being factored into wider society, black people being more commodified as a legacy of slavery and stuff, right? Like it's all of those things. That's why it's important to maintain all these conversations about various identities and how it sort of all intertwines. What I am going to do in a moment, or probably in a minute actually, is just look at some of the questions and comments from the chat, just to give us a few things because there are a few questions interspersed and comments and stuff interspersed.
How many people were on like the stream?
Well, it's virtual. I mean, Well, it's more than usually actually. Like 10 or 11 at one point, which was I'm happy with those numbers on my little pocket of the internet. Um, Vladimir Pupin, 84, says, "What defines the left or the right?"
I would define the left as a general like thought that is hostile to hierarchy. Like in the simplest terms, that's what I would define as left wing thought. I
I
mean,
mean, I
again, I don't consider myself
largely.
again, I don't consider myself a leftist, so I'll defer to you to see if my definition is generally accurate.
I mean, I'd say there's like main like yeah, like opposition to hierarchies, injustice, the idea that you're looking at what is the power structure and how can we make sure everyone has a fair state in society. What is the hierarchy that which is unjust and preventing people from having an enjoyable life and such, right? Be it racism, sexism, capitalism, etc. But then I guess this is in relation to when you were talking about ideology going too far. Like, if you're questioning a hierarchy, how can you question that hierarchy too far? Like, how can you, like, if you're talking about racism or something, how can you say, oh, it's gone too far? Like, ultimately, it would be a case of either, like, a bad criticism or, one you didn't necessarily agree with, but how could you say it's gone too far?
Is that a question for him or for me? Because it looks like it's his question.
I assume that was towards you, but yeah, feel free to clarify, Vladimir. Um,
But
but what?
oh, so I would okay. So to also answer like part of your question, Vladimir Putin. So for right wing thought, I would just define it because we have to create something that you unites like a trad cap like monarchist and like an anarcho capitalist and like a tech bro. So I would say like the essence of right wing thought would just be that hierarchy and inequality are inherent in ontological realities rather than something to abolish or something that was constructed. Because
Ah,
it's just I
yeah.
mean like it's I know I feel like it's tougher though because within the right like you'll ironically see more diversity, and I only mean that in the sense that like you can literally have like a religious fundamentalist and like a tech bro who seem to be completely different but yet they're both on the right. So I feel like the right wing definition might have to be a lot more like general maybe.
Okay, but both of those people are in. Yeah, they both sure they're different on like in some theoretical way. They both sit atop various hierarchies, want power, support systems that maintain said power structures, and so the idea that your coalition on the left would include like a tech bro and a trad calf. What was it? You said traditional Catholic.
Like a trad monarchist or
Yeah,
something.
exactly right. Like, yeah, if you're not if those people aren't willing to adapt some of their views, and b critically, I think more importantly, if you are entering a movement and you're saying, "Oh, well, I don't believe in that trans stuff, but I want to be in a movement," like, well, no, because that like upholds negative ideas about society, that alienates people, that means that in that space trans people are being sidelined and devalued by that person. Same for disabled people, like same for any group. So I think there's an element of like, yeah, of course we want to try and speak to people and try and have as many people as possible, but if you're not gonna like get on board with certain ideas and if you're not going to entertain the idea that, yeah, actually maybe I've got something to learn, then at some point it's fine to say, well, no, I'm sorry, we don't actually want you around. And I do think as well that despite what people say, it's not as much there's not as much bigotry in the world as we think. A lot of it's just learned. A lot of it isn't inherent, and like you said, with hierarchy being something that's in society, I don't think it is immutable. Another question for you specifically. Please ask the guest to demonstrate his understanding of the social history in the last couple of centuries of the usage of the loaded term assimilation.
Couple of centuries uses of assimilation. So whenever I'm saying assimilation, I'm referring to the general idea that if you enter a society and the society has a certain set of like values and customs, that you should respect those values and customs. And that's pretty much really the gist of it. Like if you come into a society and you're blanketly against the values and customs of the society you're in, like that's obviously not good. It will cause conflict. It will cause, um, yeah, it will just that's just a illogical, impractical thing.
I mean, unfortunately, um, like the idea that people have to assimilate comes from like a lot of very like far right white nationalist ideas about
Right, but again, just
the
practically though, like if you enter
no, but
society,
it's this
you shouldn't be in
for as
complete
much as they
opposition to its values. Like this is practical thinking, right? Like why
like.
would someone why should someone come into society and be like blanketly against like the society's own values?
I mean, we went over earlier the idea that this is like hinged on some national thing and not like just a wider issue. And it's also like it fundamentally the idea that people are just like fixed states of being and can't like malleable and change to the thing. But what I think Loop is saying specifically here is that who is using the term assimilation, who is using that as a talking point, and it's really unsavory characters that don't think about people like us, for instance, do not get to fit into the worldview of those who use this. Gloop says, I want you to talk about whether you understand specifically where that usage comes from.
Like the etymology of the word assimilation, no. But again, it doesn't change the fact that in a practical sense, if you enter a society, you should respect the society's values.
That you get like the
like again, like I think I understand what this YouTube gloop. I understand what they are like saying and trying to bring up, but I guess if the word is a problem, just the idea that if you enter a society or enter a community, that you should respect their values. And I feel like that no one should have a problem with that. It seems like common sense to me.
like, and we already gone over why that we don't necessarily share that view, but I think the point being made here is that the people using like words like assimilation, the sort of great replacement theory, new conspiracy theory stuff, the protecting our own, the 14 words like that crowd using it makes it one that I think, like, for as much as like we were talking just now about how we're on the left and whatever, and we're trying to make the left speak to power and stuff, but then we're believing things like this, right? Like it's clearly, I mean, yeah, Gloop says, avoiding acknowledging the word specifically has a loaded history that anybody talking about this knows. Right? Like it's
again, it's like this is just semantics. I get your problem. YouTube gloop is the word assimilation. Maybe I'll just not use it. What I'm referring to is just the idea, like YouTube gloop. Are you seriously trying to tell me that, like, if you move into a community or like a society, that you shouldn't care to like respect their values or try to embed yourself? That's what that's what I'm wondering more so.
oh, hello, no justice's view as well. So suddenly a massive spike of people on the channel all of a sudden. Hello, but no, like it's clearly we're like, I don't think that we can sit here and say that oh yes, this term is just being used neutrally here. Like I think the point being made here is that when we delve into these like nationalistic, oh, we've got to make sure people are assimilating to our culture, like we're clearly adopting and using the language of the far right, and then allowing them to co-opt and control said conversation and making it into a racialized set of views and such, right? Like it's not good at all. It's not something which is healthy to have as supposed left-wing critique to power and such. It just reinforces stuff and allows far right views to embed themselves into our own way of thinking, which is sort of what they want, right?
It's also interesting though, because in a lot of like more extreme far right spaces, like the racial, like schizo far right, they're against assimilation in the sense that they don't even think it's real. They just think, oh, well, you're this ethnicity, you'll never be one of us. Who cares? So even within some right wing spaces, people also reject assimilation, which is quite funny.
Well, that's
but
that's the point I'm making, right? Like right wing is like they're saying you can't assimilate. You've got like a set inherent national identity.
Yeah, and
I'm just
I'm
like
saying
in
I'm not
Nazi
talking
language,
about anything
basically.
that's said. I'm not talking about anything that's said or inherent, but YouTube Bloop, please tell me about how. Please tell me the logic behind rejecting the idea that if you move or enter a community or society, that you should not respect their values. Like, I still don't understand. Is there a problem with that line of logic? It seems like basic practical thinking.
No, it's the term itself, right? Like it's not as though there's not a loaded history there, right? Like it's clearly got something there which makes it one of our language and history and stuff isn't great. Robin says the USA, with our diverse immigration history and our very short existence as a nation, actually has no single national culture. Another one about the idea that there's a national quotient there, right? Like it's clearly more to America than just like, oh, the stars and stripes, we are unified. So therefore, you know what is it to say that the nation is an inherent like a thing you can distinguish between people when America is not America is not some like homogenous clump. It's many things.
Yeah, it's not a homogenous. It's not homogenous the same way you would see in like Japan, but again, I think as I pointed out, like it doesn't change that America is like a cohesive institution, a cohesive structure that has a distinct form of socialization, upbringing, even within the different states, the different regions, that is unique in a way that someone who was born and raised in the Philippines didn't experience. Like when you say America has no single national culture, it's like, I mean, like it's not a homogenous culture, but like if you go to other countries, like if you like do, it's clearly like feels different from being in America.
But that's not like an inherent culture for one, and I don't even think that's true, right? Because life in LA is different to life in, say, a small town in Mississippi that's been deprived of the resources LA has, right? Like state by state, town by town, is not the same. And I think even within America, sure they've got their stars and stripes, but you start talking about one state to the other, and there isn't the same like, oh yes, we're all the same, we have this national, like it only comes up when we want to exclude and denigrate others via border politics and their sort of petty nationalisms and such, and when specifically projects of capital impose itself on the populace through the lens of the nation to get what they want, like distract from economic system, what you were talking about, economics, right? Distract from the exploitation of a working class to hammer down, oh, we're all American, therefore we've got to unite against the common enemy, be it global wars overseas or strengthening the border, which is obviously a dog whistle for, attacking brown people and such, right? Like, I also think as well, the diverse immigration history is quite important too, right? Not just the masses of people that have come to America from Europe and the rest of the world and such, but America, the indigenous populations were the first, like, Americans, the indigenous people who were here first, and their history of America is entirely just shoved to the side and erased to make this nation in the first place. So the idea that there's, like, oh, we've got to maintain our border, we've got to have our, esteemed country, whatever, but only after this certain point when we're in charge and just ignore everything that came before it. Like, it falls apart when we really think about the history of the planet. It's exclusive just to what we want now and ignores the vast social change which is across our history. No?
Oh, sorry.
Like Jay says,
Yeah, again,
right? Like,
I never.
cultures are not homogenous even within regions, never mind countries. Exactly, Jay, exactly.
Yeah, and I never once claimed all individuals are the same and everyone's homogenous.
But then if that's the case, then but like if that's the case, sorry, a moth has just flown. If that's the case, then why is it that you don't care about immigration when it's city to city, state to state, and such. But then suddenly it becomes a big, like you were talking about, security and protecting ourselves and stuff. When it's a national border, which is another like it's just two different cultures potentially, and even then, not sometimes.
Well, wait, again, like America is a generally pluralistic country, not a homogenous one, the same way like Japan is, as I mentioned. But and that doesn't mean America is like not its own distinct structure and sphere of socialization. Like, yeah, there's differences within it for sure. But again, like it's just like where's the line of logic? Like, oh well, there's regional differences, so I guess like I guess just like no borders, no security, no vetting, no anything. I don't really understand the leap there.
No, but you're saying because you were saying earlier, well, culture is, some places are bad cultures, so we can't let them in, or we have to vet them and stuff. But culture differs from place to place, regardless of national identity. And as we explored earlier, there's plenty of bad culture within America and in Britain and in every other country that we would consider modern and whatever and developed. So the idea that you would only care when it's a national border, or you put all this effort into securing the border and border security and stuff, but not the regional differences that produce, say, I don't know, a KKK chapter in one part of the state and a city in another part of the state. Like, there's a that is where the logic doesn't follow. I am sorry. This laptop is gonna probably blow up in a minute if I don't, if we don't get to a close soon. So we may last call for questions and stuff, and then we'll have to, call it a day. Let's see. Sorry, scanning the chat bench for a moment. I think we've covered most of it, but we'll go for what should we got? ASMR Muzz says, "Have you asked other countries or cultures if they subscribe to your first world progressive view of abandoning their borders?" Like, we don't. I mean, I guess this one's to me, right? Like, when I was saying earlier about the injustice of states and whatever, like obviously that applies universally. We're not just saying it just in the West, right? But in the global North. But obviously the reason it's focused on our nations is because our nations were the colonizing ones. But the reason people come here is because here's where the resources are, right? Like, we are wealthier than the rest of the globe, so of course the pull factors see people come this way, to us. It's also the climate crisis as well, right? Like, if you live in a country near the equator, you're going to be having some very, very hot weather very soon. There's already been some incredibly dangerous heat waves in India, like we were discussing India earlier, but like any country that's like south of the tropic of Cancer is going to be in dire straits very soon. So of course there's going to be more people coming to the north. Like, it's just obvious. It's just basic survival.
Yeah, and I guess we should have literally no vetting, no anything. Anyone, anywhere can just come in freely.
We should sort
with
out
no like limit. Okay, what about so like not even like vetting in terms of like values or nationality, but what about just the raw logistics when it comes to numbers? Like, do you think, like, I'm not even saying hypothetically, whatever country you're from, do you at least think there should be like a limit in terms of the numbers themselves? Because I feel like, I mean, surely even you can admit that there's like an impractical amount if it's extremely high just in pure population in terms of pure numbers entering a region in short succession. Like, just logistically, like, there's obviously
sure, like there should
an
be
issue there, right? Okay, right.
Well,
so then
but
there's
that's not no, but that's
protection.
not that's true anyway of like any situation. We have to have funded public services and stuff. That's not and also preventing that is addressing the systemic faults. Making sure the society is not like massively unequal, so people flock to one region that has all the wealth and resources, and then causes the humanitarian issues, and making sure resources are shared out equally, shared out equitably in a way that lets people actually access them, is another thing to do, right? Like, we're not saying just fix one, just apply open borders and then nothing else. Like, I don't think anyone's ever said that. Obviously, part of the deconstruction of unjust state hierarchies and hegemonies is also part of wealth redistribution and ending austerity and making sure things can actually work together, right? Like ultimately, people should be able to move around. People will move around regardless of what borders and states do say and do. We should have a society where people are able to live as freely as possible, and not all pool in resources in one place, so that and also address the climate crisis too. Like if we address some of those things that are going to lower the push factors to the global north, then half the issues solved anyway, right? But no, it's I just don't think it's a great question from Kirk. Like, all this border fetishism is an incredibly modern Western invention, and the modern imposition of it is Yank culture imposing itself on the rest of the world. I resent having to hear this in a UK accent. Well, I apologise for that last part, Kirk, but I do agree with the rest of it, right? Like, I mean, what do you think? It's kind of true, right? Like, it's the obsession with the racial nativist project, the idea that the nation is a certain way that leads to the border, and it being enforced, but disproportionately. Like no one cares about different places. It's certain places that get the focus.
I mean, again, like it's just a very different environment in the UK because, like, okay, so even just in Europe in general, I mean, it's a country surrounded by other like generally like developed, stable, safe countries. So, like, the concerns or risk of having like an open border, so to speak, I can get from that perspective why, like, me talking about the border might seem like fetishism. I get it, but for America, like one of the things I was mentioning before, even if we don't talk about culture or nationality, just the raw like numbers, so to speak. Like in our southern border, when it comes to Mexico, Central America, South America, like if we literally just had complete open borders and no security, like the sheer amount of people who would want to enter the country in a short period of time would just be wildly impractical and a total logistical nightmare, and it would inevitably create instability and conflicts and problems. And I don't even, it's not even about like, oh, these are all like horrible evil people. It's just the sheer like, it's just your reality of that many people coming in, and that's something that most European countries wouldn't have to deal with if they just opened their borders. So it's also like a matter of perspective in that sense. Like it's a very different thing for America to open borders completely than it would be for like a country in Western Europe. It's like very different context and environment.
I mean, I feel like that. Like that sounds, it's like easy to portray that set of events, but America is a massive country compared to any European country, for one. So the idea that it's like the idea that you make it sound like a big horde, which also lends to that sort of racialized view, right? But it's got the resources; they're just shared absolutely atrociously. So the illusion is there's not enough. Same, housing, food, etc. Like there is enough. It's just it's not shared properly. The fact that the disparity in wealth pushes people towards global north nations like America is never addressed. So but like, it's not a surprise that people head that way. And in Europe, we do have the EU has open borders, right? Like you can go anywhere in the EU, and there's no issue. But because there's proper because Portugal, Spain, Germany, France, Italy, etc., they're all like the nations that are developed, they have the resources. There isn't like masses of people flooding from one to the other. It's people come and go as they please. Crucially, and more to the point, people move around. People move sometimes. If you don't want to have humanitarian crises, don't target the national question or the right to move around. Question why resources are so imbalanced that people go in one direction largely, and why people are fleeing or coming across to try and get a better life for themselves. Make things more equitable and fairer, and those issues won't happen. Anyway, it is sorry to cut this off, but it's been
Dude, it's almost
3
3 hours.
I know it's now the 13th of August rather than 12th for me. So I am going to call it there. Thanks everyone for listening. Quite a lot of you in the end, actually, quite a big number of you. So thank you, No Justice, for sending your viewers my way. it's been nice chatting to you. I mean, I know we've not really agreed and such, but I do think there is value in these conversations. I just wish that, for as much as you've got these concerns about immigration and identity politics, like, on some level, we've got to, if we're challenging injustice, everyone with injustice has got to go, right? And even if it's tricky and hard, and even doesn't seem like something we can, envision, it's something that has to happen if we're going to make a better world, right? So I think that sort of should motivate us to a better state of being.
And again, on my end, I appreciate this conversation. I've never done like any kind of like camera on discussion debate thing on like a YouTube channel, so this is my first time ever doing something like that. So, I mean, there's things I could have argued better looking back, at points I could have made more clear. Maybe sometime in the future we could have another discussion on a different topic. But I guess some last words of advice. Just in general, I understand, what you value, but I would just say like what you value could happen so much more easily if first the cultures that I'm pointing out as having lots of like bad values and backwards values were developed first. Because again, dude, it's just different for me like actually visiting like a country where they have lots of like those cultural problems and seeing how I mentioned my sister earlier, seeing how like much more she gets like stared at and stuff like that. It's just harder for me actually experiencing that to be like, oh, I guess we can like let anyone in anywhere. So just some food for thought. It's if I would recommend visiting a country like that or countries like that plural, because it really is like it really feels generally different. Like you can just feel like how much that socialization, those values have really affected like the society as a whole. And I don't think downplaying that is a good idea.
Well, like I said earlier, right? Like, I agree. You've got to sort out things. Got to challenge the conservative element, right wing element, and global inequality and the capitalist structure to deliver a world where everyone can enjoy a good quality of life. Anyhow, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Arya, for coming on. And hopefully, but I think on Friday I should have, I'm meant to be having a conversation with someone. We'll see what happens with that. And then on Sunday I've got another one. So a busy week for me on this channel. But no, thanks everyone for listening, and take care all.
All right, see ya.